Hey, peace and love. This is Brother Garfield. This is the Brother Garfield podcast. Today I got a special guest, Elder Yarah from the New Torah Movement. As you see, his Cash App is on the screen. Y'all donate to the Brother Yarah, and support the brother giving out this information. He's saying that he's going to provide evidence of Jesus being historical from his perspective. All right, from a historical perspective, and he's going to do the best he can. How long do you think the presentation going to be, brother?
Man, actually, probably about I can get in a good 2 hours. I'm gonna give it a good 2 hours.
All right, that's what's
I'll
up.
try to get through some of the best information I can. I'll probably have the most extensive information on it compiled than any Israelite in the community. But
Okay, beautiful.
we're gonna get through it, man.
All right, I hope Gorilla Hebrew is watching because y'all know we got the Gorilla Hebrew debate with Richard Carrier coming up, as you see on the screen. Not this Sunday, not tomorrow, but the week after Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's a free debate. Anybody could watch it. It's Gorilla Hebrew versus Richard Carrier. All right. All right. All right. So let's and y'all see his Cash App on the bottom of the screen. Please donate $5, $10, whatever you want to give, $20, $50. And tomorrow, by the way, for those who want to update on brother Morpheus's daughter, they did find. See, the brother actually just mentioned it. Ramon Beer just mentioned it. So what we're gonna do is we're planning to give flowers and stuff. I think in this time the best thing is to give actual money, because I don't know his financial situation. And whenever you're burying someone, a loved one, it's always an issue with paying for funerals and all of that stuff. That's why I tell my kids, just take my insurance money and cremate me. I don't want to be buried in no gravesite. Just cremate me and do whatever y'all want to do with the ashes. All right, that's me. I'm not saying for everybody to do that. So there's no expense to bury me. All right. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to deal with that tomorrow. But today, it's Yarah's time. So let me just share Yarah. Do I need to share it more than once, or this is going to have your whole presentation on the slides?
I'm gonna have my whole presentation on the slides.
All right. So whenever you're ready to share, the floor is yours. So again, he's giving evidence of why Jesus is historical. All right.
Absolutely.
Evidence 4. Now, watch this, family. If you have a problem with what Yarah is saying, you have an opportunity at the end of his presentation to present or to say, hey, why I disagree with Yarah. All right. So here we go. Whenever you're ready, you can share, brother, and take over.
Yep, I'm gonna start sharing, but as I'm doing that, first giving all praise to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to Yeshua, Hamashiach. And then I want to say again, shout out to the Brother Garfield podcast. Appreciate you, man, for allowing me on to do this presentation. And then last but not least, my condolences from my family to Brother Morpheus on his loss. Again, I really do send my condolences out to her and to him in any way that I can. Please, brother, reach out to me. And I will do the best that I can to assist you in any way. And I will be supporting you throughout this time. So shout out to Brother Morpheus and be praying for his family. So I'm going to be presenting this right now. Let me share my screen. All right. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to be sharing. And this is basically a presentation. It's really an extensive work. It's part of the book that I'm writing, so I usually start it off this way. But I usually start off with the historical evidence of Jesus, the mystery of the Afro-Judeo-Nazarene movement that changed the world. So I'm going to break it down in a few things. I'm actually going to address Richard Carrier in this presentation as well. And this is something I've been compiling over at least the last 3 to 4 years. So it's really extensive. And so I heard some things that came through our brother Smash, Rockwell, and some others out there that have an aversion to whether or not Jesus is a historical figure. And so when Garfield came out and said this earlier on this year, he got a lot of pushback. But I applauded the brother, not based on the religious aspect of it, but simply based on the historicity of understanding what scholars, the consensus of scholars, actually agree with, right? And that is that the figure or the personage or the person of Yeshua or Jesus Christ or Yahweh Shai, however you want to determine him, is actually a historical figure. So we're going to actually get into that with source information. Source information, right? And so this is what we're going to do today. So we're going to listen for three things here, right? So the term historical Jesus, it refers to the reconstruction of the life and teachings of Jesus by critical historical methods, in contrast to religious interpretations, right? The source for that is James Crossley, Robert J. Miles, 2023. Jesus, A Life in Class Conflict by Zero Books, right, is the publisher. Number two, it is also considers the historical and cultural context in which Yeshua or Jesus or Yahweh Shai lived, right? And so the source for that information, look up Jill Amy Levine in The Historical Jesus in Context, right? Edited by herself, 2006 from Princeton University Press, right? So these are sources, page 1 and 2, that you can actually look at that goes into the actual dealing with how you study for the historical proof or evidence of Jesus, Yahweh Shai, or Yeshua, right? And then virtually, number 3, all scholars of antiquity accept that Jesus was a historical figure, and attempts to deny his historicity have been consistently rejected by the scholarly consensus as fringe theory. So in other words, those who claim that Jesus did not exist, this is where you get your Richard Carriers. They fall within that fringe theory concept, because Richard Carrier actually states in his book, I believe in his latest writing on Jesus, that he was a mystical figure or esoteric type of figure. Although he may not believe in an accurate historical Jesus, he believed in the esoteric understanding and belief of Yeshua. Now you guys work that out yourselves. But he would fall in this sense in that fringe theory category that has been consistently rejected by actual scholars. Let's get to it. And I'm going to say this right off the bat. You're not going to get a lot of biblical verses from me, right? Because I'm dealing strictly with the historical context, right? And so what you see here on the screen now, the historical evidence of Jesus, it says Jesus explained. And what we see is Dr. Henry Clark and Dr. Ishak Musa Barishango on the African. They have a discussion on African spiritual concepts. So I have a little bit of video that I want to play. And based on from these two scholars, right, that they talk about it in terms of African spirituality, but what they never do, especially John Henry Clark, what he never does, and Dr. Barishango, what they never do in this video that we're going to talk about, they mention him and talk about him in a historical context. In a historical context. So this is not something that Garfield has made up. This is not something that I'm making up, but this is talking about Christ, Yeshua, Yahweh Shai in a historical context. And one thing they never say is that he did not exist or that he was not a real person. And this is the argument that's being made here, right? And so I do want to play this a little bit. And I'm going to play it. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I want to let you guys hear it from Dr. Clark's mouth himself, right? In which he talks about Yeshua, right? In a historical context. Let's go. I'm going to take it to about the, let me see, the 24th.
Is good enough and honorable, and if she's frequented only by one man, the African will say that her skirt is clean, her mouth is sweet. She is virgin. So the idea of virginity has absolutely nothing to do with whether you have had a child by process of cohabitation. or not. Because the Europeans now wanted to create something that had a similar purity. They now would give a lady a child without having intercourse with a man.
Well, this also have something to do with the fact that most of them were misogynists. They didn't want, but they couldn't get around exalting a woman to a higher state in the Christian church, because most people at the time that they were trying to convert to the religion was into the mother goddess concept. And in order to elevate Mary to that status, they had to take her out of the realm of humanity, so to speak.
They had to make a supernatural Mary. And I think it's unfair to her because they had to dehumanize her by elevating her above human.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary, not Christ, should be at the heart, the focal point of the Christian religion.
Well, as ironic as it is, the Catholics in some way have done that.
They have done that in some of their rituals, but they have steadily fought against even having a minor female administrator in the church.
Now, this person who eventually came to be called Jesus by them.
The picture that we get, it wasn't painted until the 15th century.
What was he actually like? What was happening in the Hebrew? He was a Hebrew, we know that. And what was happening with the Hebrews? What was the dynamic going on between them and the Roman government at that time, who were occupying their land in that little nation of Judea?
Well, the Romans occupying their land until they got on the Romans' nerves, and the Romans destroyed the last temple at 70 AD.
But they say it was a hotbed there, especially where Jesus was raised, around Nazareth in Galilee, was a hotbed of rebellion. They were constantly carrying out some type of revolt.
But they're still doing it. We're talking about people of the Hebrew faith as distinguished between people we call Jews. The word Jew had its greatest development in Europe. There are people of the Hebrew faith all over the world, in India and China and South Sea Islands, who never use the word Jew, who still belong to the Hebrew faith, and interfering with all of this internal matter between the people they had colonized.
Yarah, you there?
So
Yarah, I don't know if it's me or you, but the video, I think there's something wrong with the video. Yarah.
push them back to the, they pushed them back to
Yarah. I guess my brother got some computer issues. Yes, my brother. Your computer is messed up?
Yeah, I don't know what happened. I'm gonna come back in.
All right, jump back on. Jump back on.
Yeah.
All right, cool. All right.
Yeah, I'm come back in. Yeah.
All right. Sorry about the technical difficulties, family, but John Henry Clark and Ishaka Musa Barashango, and of course, y'all know John Henry Clark believed in a historical Jesus. Okay, so we're gonna wait for him to come back in. Jesus, stop the stream, right? Tamika is funny. Oh man. All right, so we're waiting for Elder Yarah to jump back on. Oh, hold on a second. Did I pin the link? I'm not sure if I pinned the link. So let me put the link back in the chat for my brother to come back on. Mac Tip, what up? All right, here comes Yarah.
Yeah, my apologies, man. I don't know what happens. It seems like it crashed.
All right.
Might have been from the
Probably playing the video live. I don't know.
yeah, might have been from the video. But yeah, let's get it.
All right, go ahead. You can share your screen and get back to it.
Yeah. Yeah, then I'm gonna wait for that to come up. Do it that way. Just waiting for it to load. All right, can you see it? Am I sharing?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so again, we have the video that I was playing. Here's Dr. Barashingo, Dr. Clark. They go into the historicity of Christ. They go into the historicity of Mary as well. But they never once declared throughout this entire video that this was not a historical figure or that it did not exist. What they do say is that the person of Jesus out of the Catholic Church becomes this character that they embellish, but that the original Hebrew, who Dr. Barashingo refers to as Yeshua, actually walked the earth. He was an actual person, right? And so this is from our scholars, right? Some of our scholars, our African scholars, right? Our Afrocentric scholars that actually go into this, and they never deny his claim. Let me go through to the next slide. I want to quote John Henry Clark, right? He says the Southern White Baptists, and this is just in the same video that I just showed, from the 3:11 to the 5-minute mark. He says, now the Roman Empire eternally was not very rich. Africa became the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. And except for Africa, the Roman Empire would not have been able to sustain itself. It says, now the Roman presence in North Africa is going to force into being one of the great events in human history, Roman taxation. Roman oppression would cause people to turn to new gods and question old gods, to turn a story about a God who comes forth to rescue them. Now they would draw from African folklore, the story of the child in the manger or in the mange. Now what I'm saying, he says, later in retrospect, he was referred to as Jesus Christ, right? Continue. He says, so to integrate with the Black Baptist Church, I say that would be the end of it. In the first place, most white Southern Baptists can't preach. Their intentions are not that good, and we make a different joyful noise unto the Lord than white people when we say Lord Jesus, personal Savior. We may not mean the same thing as what they mean. Then he also says in the same clip, Dr. Clark speaks on the origins of the Christian story. Before then, at the start of the clip, one can see that the earlier clip showed the actual pictures concerning the genocide of the Egyptians at the hands of the Greeks, or black skin and their white skin. This is worthwhile scene, which is why I also link you to the previous scene of the documentary where you see at the 4-minute mark. And I won't go back in it, but I'll just let you go read it. He also says, now you can argue about the coloration of Christ if you want to. He says, but I can settle that very quickly and we can go on to the next subject. Was he a Roman? The answer is no. Was he a Greek? The answer is still no. These are the only European types in that part of the world at that time. If he was neither Roman nor Greek, he was one of those other people. And all of those other people were non-European and non-white. And he came from the other people. That's a direct quote from John Henry Clark. He states in this video. He out of his own mouth. We don't have to talk about and interpret what his books may have said or what he wrote. He says it himself directly in this video. Not once he states that Christ is not a historical figure. Let's continue, right? Let's look at the most compelling evidence against the historicity of Jesus. And this is very important for this argument. The chief difficulty in working with rabbinic writings that might be about Jesus is that it's not always clear if Jesus variously called Yahweh, Yeshua, or Yeshua, with or without the further designation of Ha-Nazri or Ha-Nazri, right, meaning the Nazarene, is in fact the person to whom reference is being made, especially when certain epithets are employed, like Balaam, Ben Pandera, Ben Stada. We've all heard that Jesus has attached Jesus, the name of Jesus, or Yeshua attached to these different names. So we're talking about which one of these persons are we referring to? Let's deal with the arguments, right? The compelling evidence against it, right? So another serious problem in making use of these traditions is that it is likely that none of it is independent of Christian sources. The source on that is Craig A. Evans when he writes in his book, Jesus in Non-Christian Sources. And Bruce Chilton and Craig A. Evans editorial, Studying the Historical Jesus, Evaluations of the State of Current Research, second edition, impression, New Testament Tools and Studies, volume 6, published by Boston Brill, 1998-94. You can read about that on pages 443 to 444. Let's get into more historical evidences, right? Let's talk about Michael Grant, right? Jesus and Historian's Review of the Gospels by Michael Grant in 2004, page 200 specifically, right? This is what he says. Michael Grant, a classicist, states that in recent years, no serious scholar has ventured to postulate the non-historicity of Jesus, or at any rate, very few. And they have not succeeded in disposing much of the much stronger, indeed very abundant evidence to the contrary. This is what he writes on page 200 in his works, Jesus and Historian's Review of the Gospels by Michael Grant, 2004. The scholars on the historicity of Jesus. Let's deal with the scholarship, right? Let's deal with the scholars, right? Scholars look at the most compelling evidence for the history of Jesus. Robert E. Van Voorst, right? Very prolific study and professor in this topic, Jesus outside the New Testament, an introduction to the ancient evidence, right? This is published in 2000. On page 16, he states, biblical scholars and classical historians regard theories of non-existence of Jesus as effectively refuted. James D.G. Dunn, he says, Paul's understanding of the death of Jesus in Sacrifice and Redemption, edited by S.W. Sykes, December 2007 from Cambridge University, pages 35 through 36 states, that the theories of non-existence of Jesus are thoroughly a dead thesis. No true scholar makes the claim that Christ was not a historical figure, right? Oh, not by overwhelming majority, but it's very much in the minority. The Gospels and Jesus by Graham Stanton, 1989. Oxford University Press, page 145, states today nearly all historians, whether Christians or not, accept that Jesus existed. What are we talking about here, family? We're talking about people who actually doing the work, not guesswork, not a 15, 20-minute snippet of quotations. We're talking about people who actually studied the work and doing the work on the evidence of the historicity of Jesus. No one overwhelmingly makes that claim in the fields of scholarship and academia that Jesus wasn't a historical figure. Let's continue. Let's deal with Lawrence McTeague, right? For Purdue.academy.edu, right? Let's go into what he actually talks about. He says there is no definitive physical or archaeological evidence of the existence of Jesus. There's nothing conclusive, nor would I expect that to be. Why does he say that? Why does he say that? He says because peasants don't normally leave any archaeological trail. So when people say, well, there's no archaeological evidence that supports him being a historical figure, what the scholar is saying here, most people who were poor and considered peasants, as they were, as the first century Israelites were, as the followers of the way were, those who were people who were called, who followed Christ, and particularly his apostles, right? They were peasants. So they don't normally leave any archaeological trail. We have to think logically here, as the scholars do. Listen to what he says. The reality is that we don't have archaeological records for virtually anyone who lived in Yeshua's or Jesus' time and place, says University of North Carolina religious studies professor Bart D. Ehrman, who is an atheist, right? Author of Jesus Did Jesus Exist? The historical argument for Jesus of Nazareth. The lack of evidence does not mean a person at the time didn't exist. It means that she or he, like 99.99% of the rest of the world at that time, made no impact on the archaeological record. These are the arguments and the evidence that we have to present to people when they try to speak against the historicity of Jesus. If you consider yourself an academic, if you consider yourself a true scholar, you can't dismiss this by simply saying, no, it isn't. No, it isn't. He didn't exist. No, he didn't. That's not a rebuttal. That's not a rebuttal. No true scholar would approach the information in this manner. This is what we have to understand about this particular subject. I'm not discussing the dogma. I'm talking specifically about did this man actually exist? The one that the Bible refers to as Jesus, the one that we refer to as Yahweh Shai or Yeshua. Did he actually exist? Let's continue. The rabbinic tradition, Jesus the magician and deceiver. Among scholars of the New Testament of the Christian Bible, though there is little disagreement that he actually lived. Lawrence McTeague, an associate professor of library science at Purdue University and author of a 2015 Biblical Archaeological Review article on the extra biblical evidence of Jesus, notes that there was no debate about the issue in ancient times either. No one in ancient times even argued whether or not this was a real person. The ones that, and specifically, the Jesus that's referred to in the biblical narrative. No one at the time that he walked the earth, no one in ancient times actually even made this argument that he never existed. No one makes the claim that they made him up during that particular time. So let's continue. Jewish rabbis who did not like Jesus or his followers accused him of being a magician and leading people astray, he says, but they never said he didn't exist. No true academic, no solid scholar will make that argument. We have to be honest, scholastically speaking here, about this particular topic. Whether you want to refer to him as a deity or a dogma, you want to argue whether he walked on water or he opened the blind eyes, that's a different argument to make. We're talking about the historicity of the flesh and blood human being referred to in the scriptures as Jesus. Did he actually exist in person? Was he a tangible figure and not, as Richard Carrier presumes, is just some esoteric thought? Right? Let's continue. Non-denial of Jesus' existence is particularly notable in rabbinic writings of those first several centuries CE, right? If anyone in the ancient world had a reason to dislike the Christian faith, it was the rabbis. To argue successfully that Jesus never existed was a creation of early Christians would have been the most effective polemic argument against Christianity. That would have been the most effective debate, right? Yet, all Jewish sources treated Yeshua, Yahawashi, as a fully historical person. The rabbis used the real events of his life against him. It's by scholar Van Voorhis, right? In his writings, in his teaching, in his study, Jesus Outside, pages 133 to 134. No one in antiquity, even his so-called enemies, never made the claim. It would have been very easy for them to say, oh, these Jews made it up, or the Romans made it up. They created this character. No one makes that claim in antiquity. Do you not find that strange? This is the academics and the scholarship we have to pay attention to, right? The rabbinic tradition, Jesus the magician and deceiver. From among the numerous rabbinic traditions, many of which seem puzzling in their potential reference to Jesus, a fairly clear example is as follows. And it is tradition. On the eve of the Passover, they hanged Yeshua the Nazarene, and the herald went forth before him for 40 days. Yeshua the Nazarene is to be stoned because he has practiced magic and enticed and led Israel astray. Anyone who knows anything in his favor, let him come and speak concerning him. And they found nothing in his favor, and they hanged him on the eve of the Passover. Ula says, would it be supposed that Yeshua the Nazarene was one of whom anything in his favor might be said? Was he not a deceiver and the merciful, as said, thou shalt not spare, neither thou shalt not conceal him? Deuteronomy chapters 13 and 8. But it was different with Yeshua the Nazarene, for he was near to the kingdom. That's found in the Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 40, chapter 43, section 8. And you compare that with the Sanhedrin's writing, 67, page 8, section 8. Even his enemies, those who had a detraction against him, never once said he did not exist. Never once said he was not a real person. They called him everything under the sun, said he was boiling in, he was in hell, boiling in excrement. They said that he was a magician, a deceiver. He was leading the people of Israel astray. But not once did they say that there was a conspiracy to create a character that did not exist. Not once. During these times, we have to consider this academically and understand what the source information is actually giving us. Right? All I'll go down a little further, right? Let's deal with Bart D. Herman, right? Purdue.academia.edu, right? Bart D. Herman, PhD, in a 2011 review of the state of modern scholarship. Ehrman wrote, he certainly existed as virtually every competent scholar of antiquity, Christian or non-Christian, agrees. This is Bart Ehrman, 2012, that Jesus exists, the historical argument for Jesus of Nazareth, right? New York, HarperCollins Publishing. To dismiss the Gospels from the historical record is neither fair nor scholarly. Bart D. Ehrman is one of the most prolific PhD scholars in academia on the subject of whether or not Jesus existed as a real person. You have to bring more solid scholarship, people, when we're dealing with this topic. Simply saying, no, it didn't, and no, he doesn't, that's not a rebuttal. Source in a 2011 review of the state of modern scholarship, Bart D. Ehrman, a secular agnostic, I should say he is, wrote, he certainly existed as virtually every competent scholar of antiquity, Christian or non-Christian, agrees based on certain and clear evidence, right? And you can read that on pages 256 and 257 of that article, of the book, actually, right? Let's deal with extra biblical sources on the life of Yeshua, right? The first century historian Flavius Josephus, right, confirms the biblical account of Yeshua's crucifixion in his pivotal work, The Antiquities of the Jews, he writes. Now, there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. Source Josephus Flavius Josephus, the works of Flavius Josephus, 1841, page 613. Now, there are some people that make the claim, right? Some are detractors that say this particular section of writing of Josephus was added on after his initial writing. But that's up for debate as well, right? It's an argument that's being made, right? But let's go into it a little bit further. It says he was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him. And the tribe of Christians, so named from him, are not extinct at this day. Right? Source Josephus Flavius, the works of Flavius Josephus. Right? It says, but the younger Ananias assembled a council of judges and brought before it the brother of Jesus, the so-called Christ, whose name was James, together with some others, and having accused them as lawbreakers, he delivered them over to be stoned. Still no one saying they made this character up. In one passage of Jewish antiquities that recounts an unlawful execution, Josephus identifies the victim, James, as the brother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. While few scholars doubt the account's authenticity, says Makita, more debate surrounds Josephus' lengthier passages about Jesus. This is what I was just talking about earlier, known as the Testimonium of Flavianum, which describes a man who did surprising deeds and was condemned to be crucified by Pilate. Makita agrees with most scholars.
Elder Yarah, let me stop you for 1 second.
Yep,
One second, beloved. I don't think people realize that in the first century, there is no person. If, for example, if you believe Jesus ben Ananias is a real person, there's no evidence of Jesus ben Ananias. There's no archaeological, nothing. But this is somebody in the first century, but they want extraordinary evidence for Jesus. Well, Jesus ben Ananias is a Jesus. But watch this now. The importance of Jesus having a brother is enough evidence to say he's historical. because people are writing about him being the brother, somebody being the brother of him. That's how much he was known within the Jewish circles.
Facts.
Not necessarily worldwide, but remember, the world at that time was the Roman world.
Absolutely.
He was known in the Roman world because Roman historians talked about it. That is more than enough evidence. You don't need to have his body. You don't need to have his teeth.
Facts.
He's historical based on that standard. So what we want in 2023 is extraordinary. If somebody's saying, hey, he's the brother of Jesus, who is his brother? Oh, James. And then when you look in their own writings, in Paul, who is considered legitimate, talks about Jesus' brother too.
Right. Absolutely.
There you go. You don't need nothing else. But anyway, continue, brother.
Yeah, you don't need nothing else. And feel free to jump in, man, because it's kind of lengthy. So, yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. 100% on that. We have extra biblical sources, and no one denies the fact that his brother existed. I mean, we have extra biblical sources that says he did. And so we could continue even with this extra biblical sources of the life of Jesus, right? Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus, commonly referred to as Suetonius, in 69, he wrote biographies of Roman rulers in his work concerning Claudius, who reigned 41 to 54 AD. Suetonius writes that the emperor expelled the Jews from Rome because they constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Christ. Judeos impulso Christos sude tumultus Roma expulta, right? That's just basically said the emperor expelled the Jews from Rome. Suetonius Davis Claudius in 25. Now here you still have Christ supposedly, who's the enemy of Rome, who would have been considered the enemy of Rome. They're still writing about this guy. There's no reason to write this guy in their history. They're not writing him into history as a figure of their own, as one of their champions. They're writing about him because people are still believing in his teachings. And they're talking about the uprising and the rebellion that he caused. If the Romans made him up and they want to attest that this is a Roman-made character, why not write him as they did their other Greek mythos? Why not write him into that history as someone who they could actually revere? But at this particular time, in the first century, they made no such concession. But they never once denied his existence. Never once denied his existence. In the manuscripts of Suetonius, the name Christ appears as Christos. Right? Tacitus connects Jesus to his execution by Pontius Pilate. Tacitus confirmation. Roman history, Tacitus' last major work, the Annals, mentions a Christos who was executed by Pontius Pilate and from whom the Christians derived their name. Tacitus' brief reference corroborates historical details of Jesus' death from the New Testament. They pictured volumes of Tacitus' work is from the turn of the 17th century. That's what I have here, right to the side. It says the volume's title page features Platon's press printing mark depicting angels, a compass, and the motto Labor El Castina, talking about by labor and constancy, right? Just basically breaking that down, right? Like no one makes this claim during the first century. Would have been very easy to do so, since these people would have been more closely related or connected to the time that he existed. For them to bring out many witnesses, overwhelmingly so, that says this was all made up. But there is not one account during Christ's lifetime on the earth that makes this claim. Not one. Not one enemy of Rome, not one Pharisee, not one Babylonian Talmudic priest. Not one of them makes this claim. Not one Roman oracle says he did not exist. Right? I won't beleaguer this. I'm going to go down and I'm going to get into some more sources here. because I have a lot on Tacitus. Let me see. Let me go down here. Lucian of Samosata, right? In 115 AD, he wrote the following concerning Jesus and those who follow him. We're still in the 1st century. It says he was second only to that one whom they still worship today, the man in Palestine who was crucified because he brought this new form of initiation into the world, having convinced themselves that they are immortal and will live forever. The poor wretches despise death and most willingly give themselves to it. Moreover, that first lawgiver of theirs persuaded them that they are all brothers the moment they transgress and deny Greek gods and began worshiping that crucified sophist and living by his laws, right? And so he's connecting the teachings of Jesus still in the 1st century, that this was a real person, persecuted, crucified out of Palestine, persecuted, crucified, and brought about what they call a new religion onto the scene, or this new belief. But listen to what he does. He says, moreover, the first lawgiver, he connects Christ's teaching back to that of Moses, understanding Moses as the first lawgiver. He says they transgress and deny Greek gods. So right now he's telling you, even these Christians, these followers of Christ, even in 115 AD, are still denying Greek gods, Roman gods. So when people all talk about, well, your book is Greek, the book is Greek, they had no connection to that culture of people other than having been oppressed by the Romans, who were still under the lingua franca, using the Greek language. The Greek culture was still available and was still ongoing, being carried out through the Romans. But they did not worship their Greek deities. And they referred to him as a crucified sophist or a philosopher. A crucified philosopher. He writes again, they scorn all possessions without distinction and treat them as community property. They accept such things on faith alone without any evidence. So it is a fraudulent and cunning person who knows how to take advantage of a situation, comes among them, he can make himself rich in a short time. This is Lucian of Samosa, an Assyrian rhetorician who wrote in the Greek language and whom they translated into Latin. L. Donsky's Palgrave Macmillan, New York, pages 7 through 42. Right? So again, he's still writing in the 1st century, telling us about the culture of the followers of Yeshua. Yet, and we can clearly see with the tone and the rhetoric in his writing that he's not a fan of him. This will be a great opportunity for him to say that Jesus never existed, that they made it up, but he never once makes that claim. Right? Let me read this right here, because this is important. Lucian, the Greek satirist, or Lucian of Samosa, was a 2nd century Greek satirist. We just talked about him, 115 to 200 AD, who was highly critical of Christianity. He wrote the death of Peregrinius around AD 165. Peregrinius was a pseudo scholar, pretty much saying that he was a fringe theorist, right, a philosopher, a Christian convert who returned to cynicism in politics, committing suicide on a pyre near the Olympic Games in AD 165. When the authorities placed Peregrinus in jail, the Christians visited him and bought him food. Lucian thinks that they were duped by Peregrinus, and Van Voris writes, the scholar writes, he says, Lucian's point is to warn readers against the kind of life led by Peregrinus, who emotionally and theatrically were opposed to the reasonable moderation that Lucian advocated. Robert Van Voor's Jesus Outside the New Testament, an introduction to ancient evidence, right? Grand Rapids, Michigan, Cambridge University. And so again, no one's still saying that they created this character, Jesus. No one's making a statement. Let me go down, because I want to get to some other stuff, right? Alice, a Mediterranean historian, right, wrote sometime in the 1st century. His writings does not exist, but Julius Africanus, a Christian historian, quoted Thales in AD 221. Evans writes that the value of this fragment is slight, but it shows that someone in the 1st century knew about the darkness and was trying to refute it. Craig Evans, The Historical Jesus, Critical Concepts in Religious Studies. What are they talking about the darkness there? They're talking about the crucifixion of Christ and how the darkness covered the land. It was very unusual for that to happen during the crucifixion of Christ. So this was always to those who were studiers in astronomy, for those, especially the Greeks and Romans, for those who studied the stars. They were confused by this because this darkness that covered the land was very unexpected. They had not calculated for it. And so during the time of Christ, this was debated over and over and over again, all the way up until you see to the 2nd century and beyond, right? That they were still talking about this event that occurred during the times of Christ's crucifixion, this darkness that overcame the land, when there should not have been darkness, right? And so they're still arguing and debating the things that happened during his time. Julius commenting and quoting Athamas, it says, on the whole world there pressed a most fearful darkness, and the rocks were rent by an earthquake, and many places in Judea and other districts were thrown down. This darkness, Thales says in the 3rd book of his history, caused, as appears to me without reason, an eclipse of the sun, right? Julius Africanus, History of the World. Why that is important? Because the observers of the time, they already knew how to predict solar eclipse. They already knew how to predict solar eclipse. So this happening unexpected at this time, this was a sudden event that happened quickly in an unprecedented time at an unprecedented hour. And this is them still discussing this earthquake, this fall of darkness, this eclipse, what they call it, eclipse of the sun, in Judea during the time that we correlate to the crucifixion of Christ, right? Why should we view this as authentic? Julius Africanus doesn't seem like he is inventing this excerpt from Thales, but instead he is arguing with Thales' claim that an eclipse could have caused the darkness. Do y'all get it now? He's saying there's no way it could have been an eclipse because they already knew how to predict these anomalies. They already knew how to predict them. By the move, they already had been tracking for hundreds of thousands of years the movement of the stars, the movement of the sun. Right? But he is arguing that at full moon, a solar eclipse is impossible. And the Passover always falls at full moon. Robert Van Voor's Jesus Outside the New Testament, an introduction to the ancient evidence, right? Tertullian, right, claimed that this darkness was a cosmic or world event, which he boasted was known by the Romans. Africanus recorded Phlegon of Tralles, a Greek author from Caria, regarding the world darkness. In AD 137, Phlegon wrote that in the 202nd Olympiads in AD, listen right here. Evidence extra biblical sources outside of the Bible. Watch this. Phlegon wrote that in the 202nd Olympiad, which occurred in 33 AD, which is the very time that most historians, as well as the Bible, tells us that Christ was crucified. Some argue 30 AD, but most scholars and when you study the biblical narrative, puts it at 33 AD, the year that he was crucified. There was the greatest eclipse of the sun, and it became night in the 6th hour of the day, which meaning it was noontime. This is exactly what the Bible describes. This is what extra biblical sources, those who studied the stars, recorded on the very same day. You have a right to call it coincidence, but they're recording the biblical events in history, not being recorded by Jews, Israelites, but these are historians and people who are actually understanding eyewitness. They're giving eyewitness accounts outside of the Bible of the events that the scripture, the Bible, actually talks about, so that the stars even appear in the heavens. That's how dark it became at 12 noon. This is Tertullian writes to the Roman governors. You yourselves, watch what he says. Tertullian writes this, right? Tertullian writes to the Roman governors. He says, you yourselves have the account. Y'all have the account of the world portent still in your archives. He said, y'all got the records of the great darkness that happened in 33 AD in Judea during the 202nd Olympiad. Y'all have the records for it. That it became night in the 6th hour or at noon, so dark that even the stars appeared in the heavens. It says, you yourself have the records. Y'all have the account that this actually happened. No one made this up. This is Tertullian Apologeticus, chapters 21 and 19. These were lost, but the passage shows that they were known to the Romans at the time. He says, y'all have the records. These are not friends with Yeshua. These are the enemies of Yeshua who are recording the events on the day of his actual crucifixion. Tertullian claimed that this darkness was a cosmic or world event, which he boasted was known by the Romans. Let me see. I think I just did that already. Let me go back here. It says, there was a great earthquake in Bithynia, and many things were overturned. In Nicaea, Pontius Pilate, Paul A. Meyer, 1968, right? Cited in Lee Strobel's work, The Case for Christ, a journalist's personal investigation of evidence of Jesus, right? Done in 1998. This passage shows that the message of Christ had reached the Mediterranean at 50 AD. Van Verst places Thales in the 207th Olympiad, which occurred between 49 and 52 AD, and states that most scholars date him to this time around 50 AD. Shalakia. So we know that these things are corroborated in history, in extra biblical sources. It's so much evidence, you don't have to even open the Bible for it, because the Bible stands at what it says. But we have extra biblical sources to corroborate what we find in Scripture. Sextus Julius Africanus, a historian of the late 2nd century and early 3rd century, quotes what Thales stating concerning an unusual event during the crucifixion. Africanus writes, an eclipse of the sun unreasonably, as it seems to me, unreasonably, of course, because a solar eclipse could not take place at the time of the full moon. And it was at the season of the Paschal or the Passover, Paschal full moon, that Christ died. This account may refer to the Gospel of Matthew, which reads, now from the 6th hour noon, there was darkness all over the land unto the 9th hour to 3 p.m. So from 12 noon to 3 o'clock p.m., it was the darkest night. 3 o'clock p.m. 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 It was according to the Matthew chapter 27, 45, verse 45. This is during the crucifixion of Christ. These are extra biblical sources and accounts that are being given. Right? The 2nd century philosopher and staunch opponent of Christianity, Celsus, right, posed one of the first literary attacks against the early faith in True Discourse. He opposed Christianity because he thought it was an incongruous doctrine. He thought it was stupid. He considered Christianity a threat to Rome. But what he did not do was argue that Christianity should not be tolerated because Christ never existed. For such an argument would have been and continues to be illogical. They're writing about this man even 100 years after his death. And after these events that we see that are corroborated in extra biblical sources, and there's never stating once that he never existed. Never states that one time did he ever exist. This is a source, True Doctrine, also translated as True Word, True Account of the True Discourse, published late 2nd century, circa 170 AD. Gaius Plinius Caelius Succedanus, 61 AD to 112 AD, better known as Pliny the Younger, who in correspondence to Trajan, right, details his persecution of those called Christians. In his epistles or his letter, he writes, the one who denied that they were or ever had been Christians, when they swore before me, called on the gods and offered incense and wine to your image, which I had ordered, brought in for this purpose, along with images of the gods, and also cursed Christ, which it is said it is impossible to force those who are real Christians to do so. I thought worthy of them to be acquitted. Why? Because they didn't bow to deities or gods that they didn't believe in. They never denounced their faith. They never denounced Christ himself. This is Pliny in his epistle to Emperor Trajan, letters 10 and 96. Right? He also states this, right? He says, other names by an informer said that they had been Christians, but now denied it. Certainly they had been, but had lapsed. Some 3 years ago, some more, and some more than one. Literally, not nobody. Over 20 years ago, these all worship both their image and the image of the gods, cursed Christ. Let's continue. Let's talk about the early rabbinic tradition against Yeshua. I'm giving you guys everything that can possibly have been an argument against the existence or for the historicity of Yeshua. That's the information I'm giving you now. Right? I read some of this, so I won't get into that. I will tell you some of where we get into here. Down here at the bottom here. I just want to read this. The rabbinic tradition, Jesus the magician and the deceiver. It says, for he says he was bought up in secret and hired out himself as a workman in Egypt. And having tried his hand at certain magical powers, he returned from there, and on account of those powers, gave himself the title of God. This is a region against Celsus, right? 1:6. Chapters 1, section 6 and 38, as translated in Evans, Jesus in non-Christian sources. So even in page 460. So even a region we're talking about here, even in his argument, his polemic against Celsus, they state this again. I'll read it for you about Christ, about Jesus. It says he was bought up in secret, right? And if you go into the scripture, it talks about how his family fled and went down into Egypt to escape persecution from Herodian, right? From Herod. It says he was bought up in secret and hired out as a workman in Egypt. The Bible says he actually has a profession. What profession was that? They referred to him, he was a carpenter.
Hold on 1 second. Now, bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, Egyptomania is the reason why people don't believe Jesus exists in this community.
Right.
Let me just say that out before, and I'm gonna tell you the hypocrisy. They will argue with you. Listen to this, usual. They will argue with you that Jesus learned stuff from Egypt, but yet say Jesus don't exist.
Right.
This is the stupidity. They'll say, look, it's in the Bible. He learned from Egypt. That's how we know it comes from Egypt. Jesus, and by the way, Jesus was only in Egypt for probably less than 2 months, probably less than 30 days, because he was hiding out according to one tradition, because Luke says something and Matthew says something. They don't agree on that tradition, right? Which is cool. Yeah. But the one that speaks about him going into Egypt don't say he stayed there forever. There was a census and he had to come back. But the point I'm trying to make, they will argue you down, because he's going to talk about Celsus. He's going to talk about Porphyr. He might talk about Julian the Emperor. They spoke horribly about Jesus and the traditions. They say he learned it from Egypt and all these traditions. So if all these traditions existed, they're saying he never existed. He never existed. Nobody's saying that until the 1700s, when the Life of Thessos came out by Jean Terrasson, and all these people started following this Egyptomania after Napoleon and all that stuff. Nobody was saying it. Nobody was saying Jesus don't exist. They had to compare Jesus to Egypt. That's what started this whole Jesus don't exist problem. Right. And that's why Jabari, that's why my brother Smash, that's why Shaka, they can't say Jesus don't exist, because it kills their whole, they're not needed anymore. They are not needed anymore if Jesus existed. They don't have nothing to recruit the people. Oh, it comes from Kemet, so come listen to me. Come over here. We the Kemet guys. We the original. So they have to say that. But anyway, carry on, bro. I just had to interject with Egypt.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Feel free, man. Feel free. But you're absolutely right on that, Garfield. Like, no one just makes that claim. And as you said, the moment they start to go against that, like you said, they lose their whole footing. They're not needing the community after that. But let's talk about this real quick. Let me get down to what I know, really what the people want to really talk about, right? And you guys, for this source here, I want you guys to look at this. It's just a source. Did Jesus exist? The historical argument of Jesus of Nazareth by Bart D. Ehrman, 2012, right? He says, chapter 1, evidence for the historical Jesus. He says the mythicists as a group of or individuals are not taken seriously by the vast majority of biblical and ancient historians. They don't take them seriously when they say Jesus didn't exist. Who are these mythicists that they're talking about? These are the Richard Carriers. This is really what's being said, right? So those arguments are on the fringe. Those arguments are on the fringe. But this is a good source on taking mythicists seriously, right? I just want to show that. I don't want to read it, but I want to get down to something. I wanted to get down to something. We talked about Celsus already. I want to get down to some stuff more modern for you guys. Right here. This is what I want to get to.
All right, hold on before you go. Okay.
Yep.
Remember, if you're going to find evidence, can we all, I'm talking to all 123 people in the chat, can we agree that there were Christians in the first century? Once you get people to admit that, because we know in the 60s, Nero said he kicked the Christians out and blamed the fire on them.
Right.
Tacitus is reading from sources, from Roman sources, because he's directly saying, hey, we are saying that these guys have a little funny movement. And I mean, I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
And he's talking from his perspective on his studies and his research of the movements, because that was one of his jobs as being a senator in Judea. So now, and what I realize is that He's saying the tradition is that the guy was crucified, right? And he's taking this from Roman records, not just from hearsay. He has records that are saying this. Now, in 60s, we know Jesus Christians existed. We know in the 40s, because in the late 40s, we have Paul writing Thessalonians. Now watch this. Thessalonians, Paul is talking about a historical Jesus and crucifixion and all that stuff, right? In the 40s. So now if Jesus lived in the 30s, let's look at some other people that lived around that time. You have the Taheb, who is like a guy who they're looking to come back, a restorer, who the Hebrews are looking for. A certain Jewish sect is looking for this guy from the Samaritans, the Taheb. So he's coming back. So he's recorded as being crucified by Pontius Pilate. So we have historical records, but we have Josephus writing this, and this is 60 years later. Should we discount it because it's 60 years later? I mean, but one of the keys that I'm going to bring out today when me and Dr. Carrier debate is when Paul went somewhere for 3 years, and he went to Jerusalem for 14 years later. It was 17 years. When Paul went for the 14th year, which would be the 17 years, there was a famine in Rome. I don't know if Yarah knows about this. The famine is actually a historical marker.
Yes.
Because there was a famine throughout the Roman Empire. There were several, by the way. There were like four or five. But the one that Paul is talking about is around 45 of the Common Era. If we subtract 14 and subtract 3 and subtract 17 years, you're going to end up with around 28 of the Common Era. That would mean that Paul was around when Jesus was alive.
Facts.
And he was persecuting Christians.
Facts.
So if he's persecuting Christians, who did the Christians believe to be the Christ at the time? When I asked Dr. Carrier this, he didn't have an answer. He didn't have an answer because his whole thing is Paul is using this mythical Jesus.
Right.
Things out of Zechariah and talking about the Ethiopian book, whatever it's called, and said that's the Jesus that they're using. But this is before Paul, because Paul is on record saying he persecuted Christians. Right. So they didn't need Paul to know Christ because he already existed and taught and had followers. That's why Paul was persecuting them, because he was a follower of what is the guy named Shamil? What is his name?
Gamil.
So Gamil was he was like a pro Old Testament guy. So the things that Jesus was teaching, it was against it. So they're like, yo, we got to persecute this guy, man. And so he was around persecuting Christians. Who did those Christians call Christ? That it ends the game right there. But carry on, beloved. Carry on.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. That question you posed to Richard Carrier, absolutely, Paul definitely was around. And it tells us that. And like I said, you can corroborate it with extra biblical sources. But I want to get to what people really want to talk about, right? The origins of the Jesus myth movement. And this is what we really have to talk about, right? Bruno Bauer, 1809 to 1882, right? So let's talk about it. The origins of the world's mythologies. E.J. Michael Witzel. E.J. Michael Witzel, focusing on the oldest available texts, buttressed by data from archaeology, comparative linguistics, and human population genetics. This book reconstructs a single original African source for our collective myths, dating back some 100,000 years, identifying features shared by this out of the Africa mythology and its northern Eurasian offshoots. This book suggests that these common myths recounted by the communities of the African Eve are the earliest evidence of ancient spirituality. Moreover, these common features, the book shows, survive today in all major religions. And I'm going to show you why this is important a little bit later, but we're talking about these mythos, right? So watch this, because this is what brings about the Jesus myth hypothesis, right? That Richard Carrier and a lot of these other guys really started pushing. Now watch this. The Jesus myth hypothesis, or simply Jesus myth, refers to the theory that Jesus never existed, and that his story is actually a syncretism of previous myths and mystery religions that were prevalent in the ancient world. A lot of people still follow that today. I hear a lot of, as Garfield referred to them as Egyptomaniacs. They actually, this is what they follow today. According to this theory, the figure of Jesus is a mythical composite character based on earlier belief systems or historical persons. This hypothesis is distinct from corroboration, the belief that Jesus was a real person whose life was later mythologized, or docetism, the belief that Jesus' physical existence was an illusion, right? Watch this. The hypothesis was first proposed by historian and theologian Bruno Bauer in the 19th century and was influential in biblical studies during the earlier 20th century. Authors such as Earl Doherty, Robert M. Price, and George Albert Wells have recently repopularized the theory, though it carries little weight among the majority of modern historians and scholars. The consensus of most biblical scholars and historians is that Jesus was a historical figure, and the hypothesis of Jesus' non-historicity is rarely discussed in current academic literature. In the sources newencyclopedia.org entry, Jesus myth hypothesis. It's a hypothesis. And we're going to get a little bit more in depth in that. I got something real special for y'all coming up. In 1962, the scholar of Judaism, Samuel Satmel, cautioned against what he described as parallelotomania, right? This is almost equivalent to what Garfield refers to as Egyptomania, this parallelotomania, right? We might, for all purposes, define parallelotomania as the extravagance among scholars which first overdoes the supposed similarity in passages and then proceeds to describe source and derivation as if implying a literary connection flowing in an inevitable or predetermined direction. Opponents of the Jesus myth theory regularly accuse those who advocate the existence of such parallels of confusing the issue of who was borrowing from whom, a charge which was also made in ancient times by prominent early Christians. More recently, in the book Reinventing Jesus, the authors put forth a position that only after 100 CE did the mysteries began to look very much like Christianity, precisely because their existence was threatened by this new religion. They had to compete to survive. What are they saying here? Here's the source, J.E. Komoswewski. In other words, that those older Egyptian stories, those older stories about Jesus was borrowed from this, or Christianity was taken from that, or this was copied from this, Jesus was copied from that, and created. It wasn't until, he says, it was only after 100 CE, almost 100 years after his death, right, that these things began to be talked about, whether or not Christ was borrowed from these ancient mystery systems. Why? Because they couldn't compete no more. They couldn't compete with the growing Christian sect. And so they had to try to find a way to synchronize the Christian movement along with the ancient mystery systems. They had to do that in order to survive. And if you don't really understand, most of the economy of most of the people in ancient times was based on where you went to worship, the sacrifices you brought to the different deities and gods. Those priesthoods had control. They influenced laws. They influenced how you live. And so because this system has now become to be threatened, now they begin to try to make their mystery systems sound like Christianity. This is a fact. This is what people know. Right? Let's continue. The origins of the Christian myth has been debunked. The earliest writer to definitely assert that Jesus never existed was a German called Bruno Bauer. We talked about him. Watch this. He was a theologian who lost his license to preach due to his radical left-wing politics. His voluminous books were never translated into English, but did catch the eye of Friedrich Engels in 1820. 1895, the collaborator, watch this, of Karl Marx. Let me show y'all how deep this thing actually goes, right? In 1818 to 1883, right? In Critique der Evangelism, I'm not going to try to repeat the German, right? It says, in later works, Bauer suggested that the story of Jesus had been invented from the whole cloth by the evangelist Saint Mark. This is where the basis of these arguments began to form. Do y'all get it? 1,500, almost 2,000 years after the death of Christ.
Do you want take questions from Reggie? Reggie's on the panel. You want me to bring him up for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Reggie, what's up, brother?
Hey, how you doing? Brother Garfield, how you doing? Elder Yarah, and how you doing to the audience?
Hey,
the question is not really whether Jesus was a historical figure.
okay.
The problem is the people that are attacking the notion deserve an answer, right? And I'm not saying he wasn't a historical figure. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying some of the evidence from shows that he may have been a historical figure, but the problem with that, and that is just my belief. My belief is that he's a historical figure from the evidence that I can see and a lot of the evidence you show. But the problem is I'll give you the points.
Mm-hmm.
Who really was Jesus Christ? What was his real name, right? Who really was he, or is a historical figure now with the Bible manufactured? So tell us who really was Jesus Christ.
From my understanding, we know his name was not Jesus, right? We know that's not, they weren't calling him Jesus, Jesus. They weren't calling him by that name, right? That is a translation throughout the Greek and into Latin. And anyone wants to say, no, that just means Zeus. It has nothing to do with Zeus. I can show you the breakdown. And it's very easy to dispel that, because all you have to do is go into the Greek and write out the name of Zeus, and then write out the name of Aishua or Ishua, right? With an Eoisus. You're not going to get the same characters. You know why? Because it doesn't say Zeus. But I do believe that he was a Galilean Aramaic by ethnicity, right? An Israelite from the tribe of Judah, according to the biblical narrative and according to what we see in ancient biblical, extra biblical sources. We know that his brother James, right, according to Flavius Josephus, was actually a real person. So we know he had family. That's been corroborated. We know that many people say he hailed from the sources I read that he came from the area of Palestine. We know that he spent some time in Egypt, right, as a young child. We know that he taught in synagogues and in temples. We know he taught. We know that he taught specifically against the teachings of the Pharisees and the teachings of the Sadducees, who were the prevailing religious groups among the Jews and the Israelites during this particular time in the first century. This is corroborated by Paul, which Garfield talked about. Paul was one of those Pharisees that was persecuting his followers. So we know that he was of the same stock. We know that from the people of Israel. We know he was an Israelite.
Well, this is what I understand. These are what we can accumulate a bunch of sources and pretty much say that these things are in the story. All right. But the problem is the historicity of the Bible itself. And that is the problem. For example, let me ask you a question about when was Christ born?
Many historians put it between 4 and 6 BC.
Oh, 4 and 6 BC.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's fine. What does the Bible say?
The Bible says the Bible actually puts it in the same category, between 4 to 6 BCE. The reason why we know this is based on the time of his death which is placed around 30 to 33 AD. Right?
What passage in the Bible gives us an approximate date that he was born?
Well, we know that according to Matthew chapter 1, we can go in Matthew chapter 1.
Yes.
And it begins to talk about how the Magi came to visit him, right? These were Persian priests or not necessarily kings, but these were Persians. Those were astronomers or astrologers. They say they came and they found him at the time of his birth, right? When we talk about what is the nativity, that there was a star in the north, right? NASA has actually talked about, and they actually have some evidence that talks about that star being prevalent and being seen possibly during that time, right? They talk about it as in terms of a comet, right?
But we are not sure.
Well, they say between this is NASA's work. So this
right,
is
but they are giving an estimation, right?
Well, yeah, between 4 and 6 BCE. Absolutely.
Of that store. Okay, so a better source would be Luke 2, right? And Luke 2 says, and it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed.
Yes.
And this taxing was first made with Cyrenius, was the governor of Syria, and all went to be taxed. And Joseph also went up to Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea, into the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was in the house of the lineage of David, right? And then it goes, and so it was that the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn, right? And so this begins the story from Luke that Jesus Christ, or Jesus of Nazareth, was born in the time of Augustus Caesar. You agree or disagree?
I disagree.
Huh?
I disagree.
But the Bible says it.
I know what the Bible says, but do you understand why it says it?
Help me out. Help me out, because at this particular you're saying that he was born after the death of Augustus Caesar, before Augustus Caesar? What are you saying?
He was born after the death of Augustus. He was born after the death. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you where your confusion is coming in. Let's just cut to it, right? The reason why it says Augustus Caesar there is because during the time that Christ was born, right? Herod was the king at that time, right? Herod dies, right? Herod dies. And when he dies, his son is supposed to take over for him. That's what Herod wanted. But Augustus Caesar says, look, I don't trust you, son of Herod, to take over for your father in his death. So they did not make him king. They did not make him governor. They did not make him king. They did not make him governor over Judea, Herod's son. And so what happened is that because of that, the record still had to show that now Augustus Caesar is the one who now is still ruling and reigning in that area, right? Because he made no replacement for his father as Herod wanted his son to be. And so that's why we get into this argument that people, and we've thoroughly debunked it. Now I'm looking for my information on that now. I'll pull it up, or I'll just try to Google it.
Wait. So let me just wait. Okay, so Herod the Great, as I think is Herod the Great in the Bible, he is the one who is supposedly hunting down Jesus, but his time frame is roughly 30. Cleopatra's time frame and Mark Antony's time frame is roughly 30 BC. So this is earlier. So if Herod the Great is hunting down Jesus, right, then this is the time frame of 30. Because if he's hunting, Herod is living in a period of roughly 30 BC. So when is Herod die again? When does Herod the Great die? Now I heard you about his son, but the Bible talks about Herod the Great. So when did Herod the Great die?
Herod the Great died in about 20. Herod the Great died. I think he died about. Hold on, let me see. I'll get it for you.
Yeah, he died around 4 BC. But
he died around 4 BC.
This is the problem.
He died around 4 BC.
This is the problem. Luke 2 versus Matthew 2, right? What it is if he died in Matthew 2 when Herod was king, which is 4 BC, he would have to die before Herod died, of course. He was born. And then you have in Luke 2, Caesar Augustus, when he did the census under Quirinius, when Quirinius was governor. Quirinius became governor in 6 AD. Right. That's the issue. The issue is he born before 4 BC or is he born around 6 AD? So it's two different birth records as far as when they're born. That's what Reggie's trying to say.
Yeah, and I'm trying to help him get there because what most people don't realize is that when Luke is writing there, he's not talking. There's actually two senses that occur, and that's what most people don't get. And I'll show you. I'm gonna get the information for you real quick. There's two senses that happen.
Right, but the Bible.
The Bible is talking about that. You think that
so
the Bible?
Are you today talking to us as a scholar, or a biblical scholar, or just a Bible person?
I'm talking to you as a scholar. Let me show you my information.
A scholar, so that you don't have any religious bias. If you're talking to me as a scholar,
I said that from the very beginning. That's why you didn't hear me quote many Bible sources at all. But let me show you why. What your argument is, what you're trying to say in your argument here, right? I'm just going to show you. Right. You see the screen right here?
Yeah.
This is the census of Quirinius, right?
Yeah.
Now watch this. The census of Quirinius was a census of the Roman province of Judea, taken in 6 CE, right? Yeah. Upon its formation by the governor of Roman Syria, Publius Sulpicius Quirinius, right? Now watch this. Watch this. The Gospel of Luke uses the census of the date of the birth of Jesus, which the Gospel of Matthew places in the time of Herod the Great, who died between 5 BCE and 1 CE. Most critical scholars acknowledge that Luke is in error, while religious scholars have attempted to explain the confusion historically unverified claims. Now watch this. There's two censuses. Let me get that for you.
But you going around in circles. You just gave an answer. You just said that most critical scholars acknowledge that Luke is in error. That's it.
Yeah, well, they say Luke is in error, but he's not in error.
You know why he's in error? Because he's reporting that Jesus was born at that time. That's not what he's... Look at what you said. Look at what the source of you says. The Gospel of Luke uses the census to date the birth of Jesus, which the Gospel of Matthew places in the time of Herod. Most critical scholars acknowledge that Luke is in error. You don't have to say no more.
Yeah, but actually, Luke is not in error because he's not talking about that census, is what I'm saying.
So you're going against the.
No, I'm not. No, I'm
You're
not.
going against the critical scholars.
I'm not going against the scholars. I'm telling
It says
you.
most critical scholars acknowledge that Luke is in error.
It
While
says
religious
critical.
scholars
Listen to what I'm telling you. Critical scholars. That's not the consensus. The critical scholars, that's the critical scholars. That's the minority. Because they know for a fact when you go into the history of it, there were 2 censuses that occurred. That's easy. Okay. This isn't new information for me. This is 2 censuses that occurred. This is why seemingly those who are not scholars, like yourself, Reggie, on this topic, are confused. Because there's 2 scholars, there's 2 censuses that occur.
But what does critical scholars mean? So I'm not a biblical scholar.
It means those who are critical, but they're in the minority, is what I'm telling you.
I'm a skeptic.
Yeah,
right?
even still, skeptic, critical.
I'm a skeptic.
Those who are critical means they have a polemic against.
But can you so from this? Okay, so from this we don't know there's a conflict.
No, there's not a conflict. Is what I'm telling you. There's not a conflict. Because there's 2.
It's a conflict. I read English.
There's 2. Do you know what 2 means?
Yes, that means it's a conflict.
No, do you know what? No, that's not a conflict.
Okay.
What you're talking about is 1 census, because Matthew gives you the time that Herod actually is looking to kill children 2 years of under because of the prophecy that he receives.
Okay, now you're a biblical scholar now.
Of course I am. But by the time
but I asked you, were you going to be not biased? And so if you were not biased,
that's not a bias. I'm telling you exactly. If you're going into the text, because you're arguing me, hold on, Reggie. If you're bringing,
you're not going to win this
into it. Hold on. If you're
not going to win this because you just hurt yourself. I asked you, was you dealing with this as a scholar or biblical scholar?
And I'm dealing with it as a scholar.
And you're jumping between the two. And I'm showing you.
I'm not jumping in between the two. But if you're bringing the biblical argument into it, I'm telling you how to understand the information.
No, you want me to explain.
No, I don't want to do anything. I just want you to understand the facts.
You want me to? I don't want to. I want to see the evidence.
And I'm showing you the facts of history, right?
No, this is always when we do scholarly work, right? What we do is say that there is like Wikipedia said, there is a conflict. You are trying to make me certain when there is a conflict. Now let me just move off of this, right? Let me just move off of this.
I'm getting ready to answer you right now, right? Because this is not something. This is not something that is.
There's no certainty.
Yes, it is, sir. Where do you get that there's no certainty from? Where do you get that from?
Most critical scholars acknowledge that Luke is in error, while religious scholars have explained the confusion with historical, unverified claims.
Do you know what the critical scholars mean? Do you know what that term means?
But it doesn't.
Yes, it does. It means that those who are critical on this subject are in the minority. That's been proven.
Right, but then you're missing up the next sentence.
We know. Listen. It's okay, Reggie. We know that a majority. The consensus tells us that it's 2 censuses that is occurring here.
I can agree with that.
Okay, so that's it.
But no, that's not it, because it says while religious scholars,
if there's 2 censuses that's occurring, then we know.
Read the second sentence. Allow me to talk. It says while religious scholars, this is your source, not mine. While religious scholars have attempted to explain the confusion, because it's confusion, with historically unverified claims, which you are doing.
No, we have verified. What do you mean? We have verified
claims. Your source.
My source is what I'm telling you. I understand your argument. That's where you're trying to go, to determine whether or not, because of Quirinius census, that Jesus was, we don't know when he was born. I'm telling you, only the critical scholars make this claim. Do you get that? The
Yeah,
majority. Now
but
listen,
you don't
you already
understand
agreed. Hold on,
because you're not reading English.
Let me talk, Reggie. Let me talk. You already agreed that it's talking about two different senses that occurred. You already agreed and acquiesced to my point. So you lost this argument. So at the end of the day,
so let me talk. What
ahead,
does this say? What does this mean to the audience? While religious scholars have attempted to explain the confusion with historically unverified claims, what does that mean to the audience? Right? So what he is trying to do is go with the religious scholars with unverified claims. Because the source that you gave us says that there is confusion. As simple as that.
it's
Your
confusion.
source.
Hold on.
Confusion.
Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second.
Go ahead.
This is easy, right?
It is easy.
Now, all Yarah has to do is show a census, a Roman census regarding taxes before 6 CE in Judea. That's all he has to do. Show another census. Instead of y'all going back and forth. And I'm going to tell you why.
Okay.
I don't think he can, but he said he has. He can. So Yarah, provide that source, and then we'll just move on. We're taking too long on this.
Yeah. Now, if he actually goes down where he says in my sources, it explains it. It says specifically down at the bottom. Are you showing it?
Yeah.
Right. It says specifically, Paul Barnett theorizes that a census unrelated to taxation took place before Quirinius' tenure. James A. Nolan argues that the census of Luke's gospel was the Pater Patris census in 2 BCE, asserting that Quirinius served 2 terms as governor of Syria and conducted 2 censuses in Judea. 2 censuses.
All right, now watch this. Click on 23, right? And see what the source for that is. What is the source for that?
Right there, perspective here.
Right now, the issue with that is that the issue is there is no other census. That's what the issue is. Yeah, you could talk about this another time. It's a lot. What it is, bro, Yarah, I'm gonna tell you what the bottom line is going to be. The bottom line is going to be is that it's an error by Luke. What happened is you're being religious in a sense, and I'm gonna tell you why. You can't say Luke is making an error. So you're gonna fight that. And it don't make no sense you fight it. Let's move the topic on, move on. Because you're not going to admit that. There is no
move the topic on, but again,
I debated James Cassell on my channel about this. There's no other census. There's none.
Yeah, I don't know. That's perfectly fine, but you're dead wrong. And if he doesn't, and if he doesn't,
that's fine.
And I'm sure.
Hold on, Yarah, that's fine. Let's move on, though.
But let's move on. But I'll come back to this later. Here's the article that deals with this, right? And it breaks down that in fact that there was 2 censuses. Period.
Hold on, I'm gonna show you why. There's no census in Judea because guess why? There's a lot of. I'm not gonna say why, but when you bring it up later, I'll bring it up why. There's no census in Judea. They had no reason to.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you why they had to. I'm gonna tell you they had to have 2 censuses. One census was for taxation, and one census was to call the people back home. So the one that they had to go back home, you had to pay a census in Judea, and then you had to pay a census from where you were born at. That's why they traveled to Bethlehem. 2 separate censuses.
You mean taxes?
Taxations, yeah, taxation.
Don't worry about
but
it.
The census was to connect you to taxation. So you had to go back to your place of origin. Mm-hmm. It was 2 separate censuses.
It's not
taxation.
Okay, listen, Garfield, I'm gonna leave. I think I made my point. I just wanted to see if he was gonna argue it as a scholar, as a skeptic, or being biblical and find random articles to make his point when there is confusion with that biblical text. But he can't go against the Bible. So it
doesn't go against the Bible. What are you talking about?
I'm gonna get off.
It actually agrees what the Bible says. I don't get why you're saying that there's 2 different arguments. It's not. And it clearly says, and this is why reading comprehension is important.
Hey, dude, I got college
When
dudes.
it
Don't
says,
tell
so
me
do
about
I, but
reading. Don't ever do that to me, bro.
when it says critical, that's a minority. That's not the consensus.
No, critical scholar does not mean
They're telling
minority.
you
Y'all
that
wasting time on this, man. Come on.
we are.
But he's lying. I'm getting off. Critical does not mean a minority. That means people that ask questions.
Reggie, reading comprehension is important.
Let's move on.
And show me your degree in reading comprehension, my dude.
Show you my degree.
What? You got a degree in what?
I have a degree in religious studies and world religion. I also have a degree. Excuse me?
From where? I just want to ask.
I have a degree in religious studies from Columbia College. I also in Chicago, Illinois. I also have a degree in applied behavioral science from Ashford College.
Okay, that's fair. So you're supposed to be able to read.
I can trust me. I can read. So when I understand what I'm reading, I wouldn't make the mistake.
Hey, hold on. Stop. Do you still have it on the screen? Go back. Press your back button.
On what?
Yarah, let's press your back button. Go back to the
right there.
No, your back button to go back to the wiki article.
Oh, the wiki article. Okay. There.
Go all the way back up. Go back up.
Okay.
Go back up. Up. Right there. What does it say right there? That line. Most biblical scholars have acknowledged that Luke is erroneous.
Yeah, that's what they say.
Most biblical scholars. Most. We're not talking about the other line that you read up above. I'm talking what it says in that same article that you're reading. Most biblical scholars have acknowledged that Luke is erroneous. And you know why I agree with that? Because there's this Christian guy that believes in the Bible. His name is it Barber or whatever? Ain't nobody love the Bible more than him. And he agrees with that. He will never say there's an error in the Bible. But with this argument, he said Luke is erroneous. So we're not saying most critical scholars now. We're saying most biblical scholars.
No, that's and I'm gonna tell you why that's inaccurate information, right?
No. You just said, well, you just got on Yarah.
But I'm telling you
for saying most critical scholars.
I'm telling you.
No,
listen, I'm gonna show you why, bro. Y'all have to understand, bro, when information gets updated. I'm telling you, now we understand that this is why when he talks about Augustus Caesar, there was no consensus under him because he didn't put the census out. The census wasn't done under him. The census was done under when Quintus. It was done under Herod, right? When under his son, he made him ruler, but he didn't make him king or governor. He relegated him to a smaller sense. This is why we had a separate census. Why he had to go back to Bethlehem and why they had one in Judea. That's two. That's not one. That's two. So, like, we can read the information and see. Y'all have
when did Herod die?
You said what?
When did Herod die?
Herod the Great. He died 4 BCE.
Give me a source for that.
What?
We have it in Josephus. We got that. That's
okay. We have it in So you saying in 4 BC he died in Josephus? I mean, and Josephus reports that he died. I can accept that if Josephus gave that date. I don't have any reason why not to be a skeptic. But I asked Yarah when he died, right? I didn't ask you, Garfield.
I just told you. I said it before though earlier. What are you talking about? We talked about this already.
Okay, so now the problem is again, I didn't say that there's no historicity of this Jesus. I just asked you who he was, right? What was his name, right? Roughly when he was born, right? Okay, there is some conflicts with Herod and all those things. I understand that. That's why people challenge the Bible, right? Or challenge Jesus because of historicity issues. And that's all I wanted to do. But you wanted to defend instead of getting better. Whatever you say Whatever you said today won't fly really in a historical with a scholar like Dr. Carrier. It would not fly.
What do you mean, like a scholar? Dr. Carrier said Christ never existed, that he's a mythical figure. He's dead on that alone. What are you talking about?
No, but Dr. Carrier.
What are you talking about? He shouldn't even be involved in the discussion.
Dr. Carrier would drill down.
Dr. Carrier wouldn't get past the fact that Jesus is a historical figure. Period. Nothing else he says matters after that.
No, what he would do is question your expertise.
Question anything. He can question my expertise all day. He can't get past the fact that Jesus is a historical figure when he emphatically states that he's not.
No. I'm saying we show. We actually
Reggie. Like, you can't argue with me. You can't argue with me about what the biblical narrative says if you don't believe, like yourself, that Jesus himself is a historical figure.
Well, I can argue other things. For example, can I ask you, why did Mary go to the cave? Why did Mary go to the cave to wash Jesus's body? Why did he do that?
What?
Why did Mary go to the cave to wash Jesus's body? Why did she do that?
It was a custom to wash the body, to anoint the body. It was a custom to do that.
3 days.
Hold on, Reggie. Before you answer the question, are you saying that Quirinius was governor twice?
No. I'm not saying he was governor twice.
Okay, because in Luke 2, it's saying that while he was governor.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying he was governor twice. I'm saying there was two consensus that had to happen. One during the time of Herod, one during the time after Herod. Quirinius is in this. That's his duty throughout the whole reign. He survived the Father all the way to the Son, but the Son was never placed in power because Augustus Caesar wouldn't put him in power.
Yeah.
So this is where the confusion comes in, because people reading it as if this is one linear event that's happening, and it's not. So Luke is talking about one instance, and Matthew is talking about another instance. But they both deal with Quirinius. So this is why people are confused about it. That's why people who are not scholarly, people who are simply critical, and people who actually can't really go into the fact and say, look, I've actually studied and done the work to show it, will try to make these arguments. These aren't new arguments. These are old arguments.
And most biblical scholars believe that Luke is in error. But you are the smartest scholar in the world. You're better than most scholars that believe that Luke is in error.
We have new updated information.
You are the minority.
No, we're not. There's new updated information that proves it already.
Even if there is a new thinking, it is still a minority. Prove it with a source.
It's not a new thinking. What are you talking about?
It says most biblical Wikipedia, they update it all the time. It says most biblical scholars believe that Luke is in error. So show me a list of biblical scholars right now that say opposite to that. On that point, don't pull up that. Show me on Luke. Yeah, you just pulled it up. You ain't gotta talk to me like that. Am I reading it? What's the date of it? What are you bringing up? Go to the beginning of it.
Yeah, let me help you.
No, go to the title, the beginning. You want to do this?
It talks about the sisters of Quirinius.
Great. What's the date of this? What's the date of this?
This March 1984.
Okay, that's not current.
Why not?
Because the source says that most biblical scholars say that Luke is in error. You're going to bring me up in something in 1984. Bring me up something more on that point.
This already talks
hey,
about
Garfield, you know what? Garfield, that's why you are a better biblical scholar. because you don't play around. You don't do this. That's why Garfield is my brother. I don't care what nobody say. Brother Garfield is better to debate the doctor whatever than you, Yarah, because you're saying things you want us to believe. It don't mean
I don't want you to believe anything. I never asked you to believe anything.
you
I'm saying.
did. You
I
said
didn't.
you want me to a bunch
Reggie,
of
I
times.
told you to look at the information, read it for yourself. You haven't done that.
I'm asking you for a source. I'm willing.
Hold on, Reggie. What you're doing as a poor scholar yourself is attempting to data mine information that you have no study and no knowledge of.
I haven't insulted you.
You have no. You're data
Where's
mining.
your writing?
You're data mining.
You show me something. You show me a goddamn journal article that you wrote.
Reggie.
No. You think you're a scholar?
Data mining. You're data mining to try to prove. You're data mining.
Show me anything
to try to prove a point that you have no knowledge of. And you can't. And what you can't do. And what you can't do, Reggie, is dismiss the fact that when I show you
now
what you can't do, Reggie, what you can't do right now. What I can show you, many of my psychological reports. Things that I have.
No, I'm on the subject.
What you want to talk about? You want to show me? Are you going to show me anything on this subject?
Right? Look,
what do you think I'm doing with this presentation?
I don't want to care. I want to see something in writing that you wrote that people could peer review.
You can peer review my work if you like.
No, I want to see where it's in a position to be peer reviewed.
I don't need to have a peer review work. I don't need to have a peer review work.
Garfield, that's why you the best at this.
I don't need to have a peer review work because you're not even talking to anyone on this panel who has any peer review work on the subject.
That's the point of scholarship.
Do you have any peer review work on the subject that you're arguing against, Reggie?
My blood pressure is getting higher, right? You're just dealing with. I'm ashamed.
Reggie, do you have any peer review work on the subject that you're arguing against, Reggie?
I am ashamed, Garfield.
Reggie,
this is no better.
Do you have any peer review work on the subject that you're arguing against, Reggie? Do you have any peer review work on it? You don't. So your position of arguing against it is simply that you're data mining quotes without reading the history. The fact remains it's 2 senses.
Where's the source that says there's 2 sentences?
I just read it for you.
Where? Bring it up again. Bring it up slow.
I just read it for you. But you haven't answered my question. Do you have?
No, we're talking about taxation.
No. Do you have?
What are you talking about?
Do you have any peer review work that allows you to argue with the data mining that you pulled out in the question that you asked to even make this argument?
Well, here's the point. As being a skeptic, right? I can look at information. I'm trained to look at information and to deflock people like.
So the answer is no. How can you deflock it if you haven't?
But you are the expert.
Studied it to the degree. Hold on.
You are the expert and you got no writing.
That you've done no work.
You are the expert on the subject. You got no writing. Goodbye.
Reggie, how much work have you done on this subject? Answer me. Because I'm showing mine on this channel today. What work have you done on this topic, Reggie? None.
Let me ask you a question. Was it a census or was it a vote by Roman citizens? The pater patria.
It was a vote by Roman citizens.
So that's not a census then.
Yeah, that's what they called it. That's what they called it, but that's what I'm saying, but that's what he's referring to.
It had nothing to do with Judeans, though.
That's what I said. That's why they went. That's why one was for Judea. I said that.
Hold on. Luke is talking about 2 things I'm going to mention.
Yep,
Luke
bring it up.
To a census, right? While before Jesus was born, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's talking about a census due to taxation, right? And he's talking about a census in Judea, and it was when he was governor. Now, we know he wasn't governor at the time when you said it happened. You're saying it happened previously, but so when they say he's being erroneous, they're just saying he's in error, bro. It's not that big a deal, though.
No, but he's not in error. Y'all, they're saying
that.
The
census. Hold on.
Yeah,
so the census is a vote This is what you're saying. And he was a governor at the time.
No, he wasn't a governor at the time. He was made governor. He wasn't a governor at the time, but it's still the same person. That's what I explained.
Hold on. So why is Luke saying it was at the time when he was governor?
No, he's at the time that we said at the time that he was governor. He's talking when we talk about governor. We're just talking about the term magistrate or ruler. He was still over both, so you would still refer to him as a governor.
Over both of where? Over Syria or over Judea?
Over the duties for the actual taxation, and then the criteria when the citizens vote. He was over that.
At 2 BC, he had nothing to do with Judea.
No, this is why he had they had to go back to Bethlehem.
It can't be, bro. Listen to me, Yarah. Yarah, you got to be reasonable. I know you want to be right.
But this ain't about me being right. This is about what it actually says.
Portray has to do with when the people of Rome proclaimed Augustus Pater Patrae, meaning father of his country. But what happened is it's a reference to a vote by Roman citizens, which had nothing to do with Judeans. And Jesus is in Judea. So whatever you're talking about with Pater Patrae can't be a response to it.
Listen to what I'm saying.
Hold on.
Go ahead.
Luke is referring to that one in 2 BC. The one that you're saying this is why most biblical scholars say it's an error. That's why they're saying this, because the source Pater Patrae, because what I did is I have a file on this, and I have the responses because Dr. Carrier did a whole response on this to all the scholarship on it, and it's more up to date. So he has an up to date response. What happened is we want to fix that Matthew and Luke synchronize, but what people got to realize, if there's an error, this is why most biblical scholars say, "Yo, why fight this? It's an error. Let's let it be." We ain't gotta fight.
No, I don't think we got. I don't think we got to fight.
45 minutes.
I don't think it's a fight. But Reggie wanted to fight it.
But you're saying Pater Patrae based on that author. I'm telling you that the author is incorrect.
When did it occur? When did Pater Patrae occur? When did they do that?
2 BC.
2 BC, right? At 2 BC, what did they have to do in 2 BC?
Who had to do?
What did the people have to do? They had to do something.
There was a vote by Roman citizens.
It was a vote by Roman citizens. Where did they have to? How did they vote? How did they do that?
I'm not aware.
They had to go back to their home.
Where is that record at? Show me where they had to go back to their home.
Hold on. I got to look at it. I got to look up.
And it has to do with an oath. It's a vote with an oath taken. This is nothing. This ain't got nothing to do with Jesus, bro. You're gonna lose this argument.
I'm not making an argument that it has to do with. I'm not making an argument.
You know what this is, Yarah? Yarah, listen to what I am saying. All you gotta say, bro, it's an error by Luke. There's no more conversation needed.
It's not an error by Luke, but we can move on.
So most biblical scholars say it's an error. But you're saying it's not an error. Hold on. You're saying it's not an error because of something called the Pater Patrae, which is not a census, but it's actually an oath-taking vote. That ain't got nothing to do with no census and moving back to where you are, bro.
Listen to what I'm saying to you, Garfield.
Oh, man,
like y'all want to argue against the point.
Yarah, all you got to say, bro, is that all you got to say is it's an error and move on.
I disagree. That's what I'm saying. I disagree. And I don't think the history is what I don't think, because what we have to understand too is when Luke is writing, Luke is not a contemporary of any of this. This is what
neither is Matthew. But this is what I'm saying to you though. Matthew is writing years later, 85 or 80 of the common era.
Well, actually, that's
Luke is 85. He's 80.
Well, actually, I don't think that's correct with Matthew, so to speak, because we know his writings was first done in Hebrew, and they were around much earlier.
We don't know that. That's according to Epiphanius and them later on. We don't know that.
Well, that's not just according to Epiphanius. They do say that his work was
even if it was written in Hebrew. That's not the point. The point is Matthew is saying one thing and Luke is saying something that's contradicting it.
I don't think that's the point. I don't think it's contradicting. I think they're right. They're writing about two separate occurrences here, two separate things.
But two of them can be censuses because the one you're referring to in 2 BC is not a census.
Well, we say that's a census. I mean, a vote is a census.
The vote is a census.
Yeah.
A census is collecting numbers of people living in an area, bro. What are you talking about?
Like, come on now. If you raise it, like if you have a room full of people, right? You have a room full of people, and you say, should we agree to do this and we agree to do that? And you tell them to raise their hands, right? That's still a vote that you have to count. That's all I'm saying. But he's writing from two. They're writing from two.
But this vote, it has to do with oath taking. It ain't got nothing to do with
I got what you're saying, man. Let's move on, man. Let's move on. All right, cool. But let's move on. Right. But I get what you're saying. I disagree. That it's a contradiction. It's not a contradiction. I just don't believe that. Right. But let's get into it, right? Because I want to get to where people pull out most of their origin. Because can you see my? Hold on, let me see. Let me show this right here. Right? Have you seen this article?
Yes, sir.
What do you think about it?
It wasn't great. He didn't respond directly to the book per se, but he did make a few good points.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So again, when people talk about the historicity of Jesus, the book, I understand. Like he goes into he only claims Jesus is a mythical figure, right? Pretty much is what Richard Carrier's argument is. Do you agree with that?
Again, brother.
I said, do you agree that Richard Carrier just simply says Jesus is a mythical figure?
No. He basically says he uses a methodology that's kind of weird.
That Bayesian theorem.
I don't think we should use a Bayesian theorem with that.
Yeah.
But what I do think is that he's the best of what they have. Without him and the guy from Australia who also wrote a peer-reviewed book on Jesus, he's actually just repeating Carrier's work. And this is why I say I'm going to ultimately challenge this, because nobody has refuted them and used a methodology. That is their gripe. So they're saying,
I think he fails. I think he fails on that Bayesian theory.
No. With the Bayesian theory, it's fine. He could do what he wants, because remember, he said that if Galatians 1:19 is a historical brother or a real brother, that puts the chance of Jesus being historical over 50%. So he actually is making an argument, and he's not saying Jesus don't exist. He does say there's a 33% chance.
That 33% chance. Yeah, I don't even know why he even attempts to make the argument, though.
No, he's trying to remember this. When you're funded by people and people paying for your student loans and all these different things, you come out with any paper that you want to. Because to be free out of student loans is freedom.
Right.
That's true story about that. You're free.
Right.
But
because that's a whole.
I don't think, he has his purpose and he's doing what he's doing and he does it well. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Because I think there's a whole argument out there against him using that Bayesian theory, right? That Bayesian theory. Because if you apply that Bayesian theory that he uses to other historical figures,
bro, you got to remember that the guy said, and for those who support Carrier, remember there's a guy on the Christian side that used the Bayesian theory to prove that Jesus was resurrected. Yeah. So it's the Bayesian theory. We got to be very careful with the Bayesian theory.
That's not. Right? Yeah, there's no way you can use it for that. But yeah, I think. But from the works of his that I read on when he uses that, like, I was like, there's no way he can. I mean, he can argue a point, but I think he fails. Right? I just think he fails. So when people bring up Richard Carrier, like, he's not like, nah, it's a lot of guesstimation. It's a lot of guesstimation. He brings actually no evidence at all to the contrary, right? And so then let me get to this, and then I'll try to close this down. So first, the false dying and rising savior deities, right? And so We have James George Frazer, the dying and rising Savior's deity, right? The Golden Bough is a 12-volume collection of mythology accompanying commentary on the religions around those myths. It was published by James Frazer in 1890. In a seminal work in the field of comparative religion, the concept of a dying and rising God was first proposed in comparative mythology by James Frazer's seminal work, The Golden Bough, in 1890. Frazer associated the motif with fertility rites surrounding the yearly cycle of vegetation. Frazer cited the examples of Osiris, Tammuz, Adonis, Attis, Dionysus, and Jesus. Frazer is commonly interpreted as an atheist in light of his criticism of Christianity, especially Roman Catholicism, in The Golden Bough. However, his later writings and unpublished material suggest an ambivalent relationship with Neoplatonism and Hermeticism. And that source is from Sigmund Freud's work, Sigmund Freud, Totem and Taboo, resemblance between the psychic life of savages and neurotics, right, by A.A. Brill, 1919. But I'm going to show you where we get all this dying and rising Savior stuff in this comparison to Horus and Jesus and stuff, where all this stuff really came from, right? Like I said, no one in the first century, even up until I say 17, 18, 1900s, really started to talk about that and try to even make these correlations. No one before that even believed that. So what they want us to believe is that every scholar before the 17, 18, 1900s was pretty much had no idea that this Jesus myth was taken from Egyptology and all these other different types of things and make this composite being. No one was able to even verify that. So they were the ones that came out with this and sort of brought this out. But I'm going to show you, it says Frazer was the first scholar to describe in detail the relations between myths and rituals. His vision of the annual sacrifice of the year king has not been born out of field studies. Yet the Golden Bough, his study in ancient cults, rites, and myths, including their parallels in early Christianity, continued for many decades to be studied by modern mythographers for its detailed information. That was Mary Beard's work. And let me go down here. I want to go down and start getting into where we find out where people really begin to talk about this. Right. So when we talk about Christ versus Caesar, right? People talk about it as Caesar, right? It says in John's gospel, it stated that the day of Jesus' trial execution was the day before Passover in John 18 and 28, 19 and 14. Hence, John places the crucifixion on the 14th day of Nicaea. Augustus died 14 AD. So he predeceased Yeshua, Jesus. Tiberius was emperor in 33 AD, but probably never heard of Jesus as it was strictly a local matter. Pilate, the Roman governor, took care of it and would have had no reason to mention it in his dispatches to Rome. So again, when people try to compare Christ to Caesar, they have two different days in which they even died in history. No one even makes that comparison between the two, right? And so, like, a lot of this stuff is just made up stuff, right? It says Saint Polycarp was killed because he would not renounce the faith of the Lord Jesus in year 155 AD. Saint Polycarp was a victim of the brutal persecution of the church by the Roman Empire, which afflicted the faithful for the first few centuries of church's life. Polycarp was an elderly man when he died. He had personally known the Apostle John. St. Irenaeus mentions Polycarp's relationship with the Apostle John, noting that Polycarp, who knew John, was his own teacher and mentor. The account of Polycarp's martyrdom has the saint making his appeal to the Roman magistrate who had offered to spare the elderly saint if he would just place a pinch of incense in the brazen burning before a statue of Caesar. Polycarp replied, 86 years have I served Christ, and he never did me any injury. How then can I blaspheme my King and Savior? So again, you have someone who's contemporary with one of the disciples of John, of Christ, one of the Apostle John of Christ. And then at this time here, no one even makes a comparison between Caesar and Christ. No one even thought Christ was Caesar. They spoke of these as two different people, right? We can go in here, right? Let's talk about this here. The armed unit that crucified Jesus was an auxiliary unit called cohorts, Sebastonium. It should be noted that the auxiliary units, otherwise known as cohorts, were made up of 800 non-Roman soldiers who provided military support to the legions themselves. Cohorts 1 was an armed unit of place guards and cavalrymen that was founded by Herod the Great, king of Judea, before his death, which occurred approximately 34 years prior to Christ's crucifixion. Then we have who actually crucified Christ, right? Talks about Pontius Pilate. We have archaeological evidence that Pilate actually existed. Here, this is what is known as the Pilate stone, right? So this is archaeological evidence that talks about Pilate, right? Let's get to this. Jesus not born on December 25th, right? Evidence that December 25th is the wrong date for the birth of Jesus comes from early writings. Irenaeus, born about a century after Jesus, note that Jesus was born in the 41st year of the reign of Augustus. There it is. Since Augustus began his reign in the autumn of 43 BC, this appears to substantiate the birth of Jesus as the autumn of 2 BC. That's why I was talking to you about earlier about that census, but we'll leave that alone with that date. Eusebius AD 264-340, the father of church history, ascribes it to the 42nd year of the reign of Augustus and the 28th from the subjugation of Egypt on the death of Antony and Cleopatra. The 42nd year of Augustus ran from the autumn of 2 BC to the autumn of 1 BC. The subjugation of Egypt into the Roman Empire occurred in the autumn of 30 BC. The 28th year extended from the autumn of 3 BC to the autumn of 2 BC. The only date that would meet both of these constraints would be the autumn of 2 BC. Let's go in here. Did the Egyptian mythologies occur after the prophecies of Jesus the Christ? In the 1600s, Reverend Archbishop James Ussher published The Annals of the World. The book has been reprinted recently. In the book, he provides his own date as to the time of Adam and Eve's existence. He computed a date of 4004 BC. Ussher's chronology is susceptible to error because the genealogy did not always present all of the children, and there are gaps. More than likely, Adam and Eve were created before 4000 BCE, right? That's James Ussher. Let me go down here and see right here. This is what I wanted to get to. Egyptologists have computed dates for the history of Egypt using the same technique. They have added the successive reigns of the ancient pharaohs provided by the Egyptian high priest Manetho. Most of our information about Manetho comes from the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus and two ancient Christian authors, Africanus and Eusebius on Caesarea, since there's no surviving documents from the high priest. That's William Winston, 1960. They also wrote about Jesus Christ. Julius Africanus states that Manetho's chronology indicates that the Egyptian dynasties extended back to 5500 BCE. The prevailing view among Egyptologists is that the date should be around 3100 BC. This would put the Egyptian dynasties at least 1,000 years after Adam and Eve. Sources, the extent fragments of the 5 books. But let me get into this because this is what I wanted to show. Did the Egyptian mythologies occur after the prophecies of Jesus? The answer is yes, because we have to put Manetho's chronology, which indicates the Egyptian dynasties extended back to 55 BCE, right? And so the key biblical events on the timeline, if you put the Exodus here at 1446 BCE, you put Solomon's reign at 970, right? And then if you put here Christ's crucifixion at 33 AD, right? This will put the prevailing view among Egyptologists is that the date should be around 3100 BCE right here. This would also put the Egyptian dynasties at least 1,000 years after Adam and Eve. And then if you start looking at this timeline, you'll see that any attestations to any of the horror stories or Osiris stories or Attis or Dionysus, any of those stories that try to make a correlation to Christ doesn't come before him, but they come after him, right? So let me go down here because I want to get to this young lady right here. Let me see. want to get to this guy right here. But okay, the selected discourses of Sennacherib the Great. As Sennacherib describes him, Geosis, right, with this wealthy landowner in Panopolis blasphemed Christ more than once, secretly engaged in worship of pagan gods, and oppressed his laborers and other poor people. Sennacherib assumed that his listeners knew whom he was talking about, and modern scholars think that they all know as well he was Flavius Elegius, or was governor of the Roman province of the Thebaid, 376 to 80, known as the Coptic-speaking neighbors as Gesius. Sennacherib's conflict with Genesius illustrates the tensions that accompanied the rise of Christian monasticism in eastern areas of the Roman Empire, tensions that were simultaneously religious, social, and economic. Why would Gesius, who kept an ancient Egyptian tradition, dismiss Jesus in Christianity if it were a copy? Right? This goes against their whole idea that Jesus was taken from anything Egyptian, right? Because we have an Egyptian priest here, an Egyptian historian, who wanted nothing to do with Jesus and Christianity. If it were a direct copy or an imitation of the original, why would he want to have anything to do with him? Is there any evidence of ancient historians claiming Christianity was an imitation copy of ancient Egyptian traditions? Sennacherib proselytizes Gesius, the one whom I found in the temple of Atrite, worshiping Satan and pouring libations to him. He scattered roses, peach branches, bunches of grapes, leaves, and other fragment plants in that place that defile one. Gesius immediately spat at him, Jesus, when I advised him to believe him, when I advised him to believe in Jesus, and he blasphemically said that the great deeds that the Lord of all, Jesus, did, Apollonius of Tyana and Plato did as well. So they never, even the people that had angst against Christ, who even these Egyptian priests, and they worship Egyptian gods, they never even made the claim that Jesus never existed. And so that's the topic and the understanding of this argument. Is there evidence for historicity of Jesus?
Hold
the
on
evidence is clear.
Hold on one second.
Uh-huh.
I would love for you to go to another hour. Ladies and gentlemen, donate to Yarah's Cash App. He took a lot of time to make this presentation. Support the brother, all right? And his Cash App is on the screen. I do want to make a point.
Yeah.
Do you believe that Hercules is a fictitious person?
I don't believe that he was. I do believe he was a fictitious person in the Greek myth.
Right. Okay. All right. Yeah. What about, say, Apollo? You think Apollo is fictitious?
I think Apollo. You mean the deity?
Deity, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that he's fictitious as well.
Do you notice something when any of these heroes that they always say Jesus come from?
Mm-hmm.
Do you notice, like Dionysus? We know Dionysus is not real. We know Heru is not real.
Mm-hmm.
When they're being killed in a netherworld or a world that's not real by people who are not real. I don't know if you notice this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jesus and the Taheb and the Messiahs in the first century are being killed by real people. If you notice, whenever we have the argument about like eponymous ancestors and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Now, look at this right now. I want everybody in the audience. We got 156 people watching. If you notice about all these people that are fake, that they compare Jesus to, they're all killed by people who are not real. Jesus is killed by somebody who is actually a real person in history. It's recorded that this guy named Pilate killed him, because in the 60s, they used to say, in the 50s, they used to say, hey, Pilate don't exist, until they found that archaeology. They thought that Pilate was not real also. So we got to understand, I'm not saying that him being killed in the story by a real person proves he's real, but 99.9% of the times, I've never found a story of a real person being killed by, say, for example, we know Spider-Man is not a real person. We wouldn't find a story of Spider-Man being killed by President Trump. You understand? I hope people understand my logic.
Right.
You're not going to find Spider-Man being killed by President Trump because he's a real guy who lived in real, you're not going to find him being killed because he's not real. You know what I'm saying? But go ahead, my brother. I'm gonna mute up.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I wanted to show. Let me bring this one up right here. This is the second part of that. Real quick, but you're absolutely right with that, Garfield. Like it's these. Let me load this real quick. Even with the whole dying and rising Savior things, I wanted to get into the understanding of these different things right here, right? Because this is what a lot of people place their arguments on, right? The solar deity worships, right? Or the zeitgeist, or the solar Messiah motif versus Yahushua, or Yeshua. So the solar deities, they say, were born on December 25th. Was not born. He was not born of a virgin. He was not born on December 25th. They say they were born of a virgin, born of the breath of God, one word, and different things like that. So as we go through these different things, we'll start to see, and I'm going to show where these things came from. I'm going to see if I bring her up real quick. And here's the person right here, right? I'm going to show y'all where a lot of people get this information from, right? Her name is Dorothy Malign Murdoch, right? Or was best known as D.M. Murdoch, right? But that's her pen name. D.M. Murdoch is the false name. That's her pen name, right? But Akaria, right? She was an American writer supporting the Christ myth theory that Jesus never existed as a historical person, but was rather a mingling of various pre-Christian myths, sun deities, and dying and rising deities. She wrote and operated a website focused on history, religion, and spirituality in astrotheology. She asserted the pre-Christian religious civilizations understood their myths as allegorical, but Christians obliterated evidence by destroying, suppressing literature after they attained control of the Roman Empire, leading to widespread illiteracy in the ancient world, ensuring the mythical nature of Christ's story was hidden. She argued the Christ canon, as well as its important figures, were based on Roman, Greek, Egyptian, and other cultural myths. And most people you talk to today, when they make these arguments against Christ, the historicity of Christ, they're really taken from her work and don't really realize it, right? So as for her claims concerning Christianity, they were largely borrowed from the work of less than scholarly 19th century figures such as Gerald Massey, Kersey Graves, and more likely influenced by similar ideas being promoted by Jordan Maxwell, then a leading figure in the same circles. Any attempt at academic rigor she had learned in her earlier studies went out the window, as she would accept any crackpot idea that supported her current passion. When any of this is pointed out, Murdoch supporters get rather indignant, and they are easily offended a lot. They said that someone would label her a conspiracy theorist, but that's exactly what she was. And many people's arguments against Christ actually bring this out. However, even a cursory look at her early website illustrates support for wild claims that were popular among conspiracy theories in the late 1990s. For example, in an essay she wrote titled, "Is AIDS Killing Your Mind?" she promoted the belief that AIDS was not caused by the HIV virus, but rather was part of a great conspiracy to overthrow the sexual revolution. This is where the whole zeitgeist movie comes from. It comes from her website. It comes from her work. And a lot of people not realizing who D.M. Murdoch is, it's this lady, Ascaria, right? She made this stuff up, right? So it also has not escaped this dissonance that the AIDS epidemic followed on the heels of the sexual revolution. She goes on to say how AIDS and HIV was invented basically to stop women from exploring their sexuality and different things like that. So this is, people don't realize this is a lot of the information that she follows in astrotheology, that she sort of comes along with her narratives, this Jesus myth stuff, right? So watch this. Let me get into it here. And I want to show that's a Pontius Pilate inscription that talks about Pontius Pilate in the Bible, has his name on it, so we know the text mentions Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, so we know that he was an actual real person. Then it goes into much of that. I want to get to the dying and rising saviors. Here we go, right here. And I'll just go to this. Right. I want to show this right here. I call it the doppelganger deities, right? Because all of these things were created, these stories were created to after, these were ancient stories, ancient mysteries created so that they can actually make a contrast with that of Yeshua. So when it comes to Osiris, there's no birth story recorded in regards to Osiris. He was eventually killed, and this is what Garfield was talking about. He was killed by his own brother, torn into 14 pieces, strewn about Egypt. His sister and wife, Isis, gathered and buried almost all of the 14 pieces. Osiris became the ruler of the underworld as the god of the dead. Some versions of the life story of Horus say that Osiris was magically reassembled by Isis and impregnated her. That's not immaculate conception, right? They're saying that they had actual sex here to create Horus. So you got to really throw out the Immaculate Conception or the virgin birth story where Horus is compared to Jesus, because no story says that she wasn't impregnated. It says she was impregnated, right? Before her ruler of the underworld. Even if this version is to be preferred, it is worth noting that unlike Jesus, Osiris would have been brought back to life by another rather than by his own power. So you can't even compare the Jesus story to Osiris, right? So the claim, Osiris was called Lord of Lords, King of Kings, God of Gods, resurrection and the life, the good shepherd, eternity and everlastingness, and the God who made men and women to be born again. Truth. These names for Jesus were not used by Osiris, who was called Lord of all, the good being, Lord of the underworld, Lord King of eternity, ruler of the dead, Lord of the west, great one, he who takes seat, the begetter, the ram, great word, chief of the spirits, ruler of everlastingness, living God, God above the gods. These rather general names were not uncommon for many other deities as well. So you can't even really make those comparisons. Again, Osiris' birth was announced by three wise men, the three stars, Mintaka, Anilma, Alentek in the belt of Orion. And Osiris had a star in the east Cyrus that signified his birth. It is true that some scholars connect Osiris with Orion, but they don't stretch the imagination to call the three stars of the belt wise men. You're not going to find that in antiquity. And there is no mention of any eastern star in the Osiris mythology. You're not going to show or provide a source for that in antiquity. Osiris had a communion ceremony of sorts in which his flesh was eaten in the form of communion cakes of wheat. There is no evidence for this in the research of any scholars. So there's no way you can make a comparison and say that Christ was taken from the Osiris mythology. You can't do it. Does not exist. All of this stuff came about after the story of Christ, after Christ had been dead and gone, and they attempted to coalesce or syncretize their ancient mystery systems with the spread of Christianity. That's why you see a lot of these stories that claim these things happen, but you're not going to find me one source in antiquity that makes these claims about Osiris. Osiris taught much of the same material as Jesus. Many teachings are identically the same, word for word. Truth, there is absolutely no evidence of any of this, and the wisdom of Osiris is still available for review. So if you go read the wisdom of Osiris, you're not going to see any of the teachings that Christ gave. So how do you even make the comparison with Christ versus Osiris? You can't do it. It's all made up, right? Osiris or Osar, right? Osiris was killed and later resurrected, providing hope every believer might also be resurrected into eternal life. That's the Egyptomanian, right? Osiris was murdered. His body was then dismembered and scattered. Later, his body pieces were recovered and rejoined, and he was never rejuvenated. Osiris then journeyed to the underworld where he became the Lord of the dead, and that's where he remained. He did not resurrect with a glorified body and walk with men on earth as the Christ narrative gives us, as Jesus did. This is what Garfield was mentioning. He was not alive again as Jesus was, but was instead a dead God who never returned among the living. That's the fact of the story. So when people are making these comparisons, there's no attestation in any ancient text, ulterior text, pyramid text, coffin text about Osiris that makes these claims. Even in the wisdom of Osiris, you never can correlate any of Christ's teachings with Osiris or Sar. You can't do it. All this stuff is made up after Christ, right? Osiris, in fact, was not a dying god at all, but a dead god. Do you get it? He never returned among the living. He was not liberated from the world of the dead as Tammuz was. On the contrary, Osiris altogether belonged to the world of the dead. It was from there that he bestowed his blessings upon Egypt. He was always depicted as a mummy, a dead king. And that's from Kingship and the Gods, a study of ancient Near Eastern religion as the integration of society and nature. University of Chicago, 1978, page 289. Can't make the comparison, right? Perhaps the only pagan god for whom there is resurrection is the Egyptian Osiris. Close examination of this story shows that this is very different from Christ's resurrection. Osiris did not rise. He ruled in the abode of the dead. As biblical scholar Roland DeVault wrote, what is meant of Osiris being raised to life? Simply that thanks to the ministrations of Isis, he is able to lead a life beyond the tomb, which is an almost perfect replica of earthly existence. But he will never again come among the living and will reign only over the dead. This revived God is in reality a mummy God. No, the mummified Osiris was hardly an inspiration for the resurrected Christ. As Yamaguchi observed, ordinary men aspire to identification with Osiris as one who had triumphed over death, but it is a mistake to equate the Egyptian view of the afterlife with the biblical doctrine of resurrection. It's not a resurrection story. It's not a resurrection story. To achieve immortality, the Egyptian had to meet three conditions. First, his body had to be preserved by mummification. Second, nourishment was provided by the actual offering of daily bread and beer. Third, magical spells were interred with him. His body did not raise from the dead. Rather, elements of his personality, his Ba and Ka, continued to hover over his body. This is the resurrection of Jesus Christ myth, hoax, or history. David J. McLeod, the Emmaus Journal, page 169. Zoroaster, right? Our main source of details on Zoroaster is the Avesta, a collection of secret texts which was put in writing between 346 and 360 AD, and of which we have manuscript copies only as early as the 13th century. And to note, conspiracy theories blame Alexander the Great and the Muslims for the destruction of Zoroastrian literature. Some of the material probably comes from a time with the Christian era, but most of this is reckoned to be hymns and some basic information. Roll 17, that was part of the oral tradition. The rest seems likely to have been added later, and for good reason. As Rose notes, the incorporation of certain motifs into the Zoroastrian tradition in the 9th century CE could indicate the conscious attempt of the priesthood to exalt their prophet in the eyes of the faithful who may have been tempted to turn to other religions. In other words, if we see Jesus-like story in these texts, especially this late, we have a right to suspect borrowing from the Jesus story, not the other way around, but in exactly the opposite way that critics suppose. Mithra was born of a virgin on December 25th in a cave attended by shepherds. What's the truth of that? Mithra was actually born out of a solid piece of rock, leaving a hole in the side of the mountain, presumably described as a cave. He was not born of a virgin, unless you consider the rock mountain to have been a virgin. His birth was celebrated on December 25th, but for the first Christians knew this was not the true date of Christ's birth anyway, and both Mithric and worshipers in the early Roman church borrowed this celebration from earlier winter solstice celebrations. Shepherds are a part of Mithraism, witnessing his birth and helping Mithras emerge from the rock. But interestingly, the shepherds exit in the exist in the birth chronology at the time when humans are not supposed to have been born yet. This, coupled with the fact that the earliest version of this part of the mythology emerges 100 years after the appearance of the New Testament. So the New Testament has already been written before we even get this version of Mithras being born on December 25th. 100 years after the New Testament has been written, 100 years after the death of Christ. Infers it is far more likely that this portion of Mithraism was borrowed from Christianity rather from the other way around. Let's continue. I don't even have to go for it. Let's deal. Mithras had 12 companions or disciples. There's no evidence of any of this in the traditions of Iran or Rome. It is possible the idea that Mithras had 12 disciples is simply derived from murals in which Mithras is surrounded by 12 signs and personages of the zodiac, two of whom are the moon and the sun. Even this imagery is post-Christian and therefore did not contribute to the imagery of Christianity, although it could certainly have borrowed from Christianity. So that's three deities out the way already, right? I can go on and on and on to debunk the Mithras correlation. Let's get to Dionysus, also called Bacchus. Dionysus doesn't fare much better. He was said to be conceived out of an affair between Zeus and a mortal woman, Semele. After Zeus' wife Hera found out, she tricked the mortal into demanding that Zeus reveal himself in all his glory. He begrudgingly agreed, knowing that this would kill her. He was, however, able to rescue Dionysus and sewed him or his heart into his thigh until he was born. This is the claim for his rebirth, a far cry from the death and bodily resurrection of Christ. That is not the Jesus story. This comes way after. Even these comparisons, in contrast, come way after the Christ narrative, right? Asclepius, right? Asclepius healed the sick, raised the dead, and was known as the Savior and Redeemer. The term sortir was applied to Asclepius, an appellation that Christians argue only applies to Jesus, but Savior can mean many different things, and there is no indication that Asclepius was known as a Savior in the same sense that Jesus is. Since he's a god of medicine and maybe a deification of an actual person who was a physician, we shouldn't be surprised that he's credited with healing people, and he is credited with raising Hippolytus from the dead, though he was killed for doing it and accepted gold for it. In short, there is some superficial similarities, but nothing, let me go back to that, but nothing substantial or unexpected, and certainly nothing that one could argue that Christians took from Asclepius' worship. Also, ancient mythology was rich and varied. It might be argued that they anticipated most possible situations, so a cut and paste job on ancient beliefs could have been applied to the life of Jesus no matter what actually happened. But superficial parallels aside, the claims of Christianity are unique. Unique. You cannot attest these Greek deities and venerations to Christ. Never happens. Here's Hercules, right? Was born of a divine father and mortal woman. A god having sexual relations with a human woman is not a parallel for virgin birth by definition. It was known as the savior of the world. Like many Greek heroes and demigods, Hercules fought lots of battles, killed lots of bad guys, etc. He was credited with making the world safe for mankind because he killed many monsters. In exactly what sense do they mean when they say savior of the world? And I couldn't find any record of the actual phrase savior of the world being used for Hercules or Heracles. All this stuff is made up. This is nothing but zeitgeist information. It's all made up. You can't substantiate any of it in antiquity. Tammuz healed medically. Tammuz or Dumuzi, right? Tammuz healed medically, but as Langdon reminds us, every deity, male or female, possessed this power. So Tammuz is nothing special or unexpected for a god, true or false for that matter. Tammuz saved, but not from sin. He saved from starvation and physical death. He was never looked upon as one to rescue from eternal damnation. That was to weigh out for him. Now this leads to the death and return of the life of Tammuz, and there is indeed one. Though to call it a resurrection, as even Langdon does, is to remove all meaning from the word. Smith and Origins of Biblical Monotheism, notes that the means of Tammuz's return to life is unknown, but adds that the description points to his participation in a ritual in which the dead were invoked and then temporarily manifested. The Tammuz cult was centered in Tammuz's marriage to Inyana, and it was her lamenting of his early death that women imitated. And we can read about that in the book of Ezekiel. So we clearly see there's a distinction even in the biblical narrative between Tammuz and Christ. There's no connection even made there. I don't even have to go any further with Tammuz. Let's do Krishna. Krishna was born of a virgin, right? On December 25th. That's the claim. And was crucified between two thieves for our sins, rose from the dead and ascended into heaven. And he was born and died circa 1200 BCE. The real story, Krishna was the 8th son of Vasudeva and Devaki. The name of their first son was Kirtiman. The BP credits the pregnancy to mental transmission. That's how they credit that his mother became pregnant with Krishna, through mental transmission, through the mind of Vasudeva in the womb of Devaki. That detail is from a late source, 950 AD. Almost 1,000 years after Christ. Does not really represent a virgin of virgins. Devaki was not a virgin and is not present in the earlier accounts of Krishna's birth. Circa 450 AD. The names Devaki are used by Christopher Hitchens and the source he plagiarized in Yeshuda used by Kersey Graves are errors deriving from a basic ignorance of the story. You can't even attest Krishna. There's nothing to even be borrowed from to claim that this is the Christ story. Right? The celebration of Krishna's birthday is one of the most prominent festivals in India, which takes place in the late summer or early fall. The idea that his birthday was celebrated on December 25th derives from no other source than ignorant or dishonest English-speaking free thinkers who falsely claim that Shravana answers to our December. Right? Krishna was not crucified. He died when the hunter shot him in the sole of his foot. In most stories, it is said to be an accident. In one story, Jawa was actually a demon getting revenge for being killed by Krishna in a previous life. Was he crucified between two thieves? Nothing like that at all in the authentic Hindu sources. All this stuff is made up to try to compete with the spread of Christianity in the biblical narrative, right? Krishna died not for our sins, but in fulfillment of two curses made against him and his clan. The curse of widow Gandhara for not stopping the battle in which her husband died, and the curse of the Brahmas for a stunt Krishna's son Samba played on some holy men. Krishna's spirit does ascend, but his body remains on earth and is cremated. Not the Jesus narrative. The date 1200 BC as the time of Krishna's birth death is not correct. Traditionally, Krishna's death took place just around 3100 BC, marking the beginning of the age of Kali. Here's the source: Kali Yuga in Rosendali, Hinduism, an alphabetic guide, New Delhi, Penguin Books in India, 2010, 187, page 187. There's no way you can make these arguments. Even is he Baal? We even have that argument. Baal is a figure known from the Old Testament who sometimes claimed to be another parallel for Christ. Let's have a look at this of our source Smith's Origins of Biblical Monotheism, 104. Baal is sometimes reckoned as one of those dying and rising gods under Fraser's. Remember, we talked about Fraser's outdated thesis. It should first be noted that the actual tablets describing Baal's story do not actually preserve an account of Baal's death and supposed return to life. That portion of the tablets are lost, and the events are inferred from remaining parts of the story. In what we have left, Baal is discovered dead and given a burial. But later in the narrative, he reappears alive. In other words, if a certain verb is read as passive, it may refer to Baal as brought to life, but it may be an active verb describing Baal as one who brings to life. Still, no connection to the deity of Christ. And we can continue to go through this and show all the various different Baal deities. Baal Gad, right? He was the lord of fortune. Baal-zebub was the lord of the flies, who Christ actually talks about in Matthew, right? Baal Shalishmir, right? The thrice great lord. Bamoth, high places of Baal. Baal Berith, the lord of the covenant, a Philistine deity. Baal, lord, possessor, owner, husband, storm god, symbolized by the bull power, fertility, chief Canaanite deity. Baal, or Baal, the chief Babylonian deity. No correlation. We can't do it. And the reason why that's important is because people often try to make this correlation with this Baal deity here. This is Baal here with Yahweh. You can't do it, right? Here's the source that really breaks it down, right? Let me keep going. Molech. Molech is also Molech and Baal. It's all the same deity, right? All the same Canaanite deity. The laws given to Moses by God expressly forbade Yasharah to do what was done in Kemet or in Canaan. You shall not give any of your children to devote them to the fire to Molech or so profane the name of Yahweh. That's Leviticus 18 and 21. Ancient Jewish history, the cult of Molech. Christ would have seriously been out it had he been teaching child sacrifices. Right? Again, here's Horus. The Horus having virgin birth? No. The son of God? Yes. The son of Horus, later the son of Ra. A savior? No. Perform miracles? Yes. As a child, he was said to have healing magic. Communal meal, bread and wine? No. Crucified? No. Resurrected? No. Ascended and descended? No. Divine judge? No. Horus is knocked out the box. You can't compare him to Christ. You can't do it. He's unique Jesus. He's not borrowed, right? Did he have a virgin birth? Yes, according to the narrative. Was he the son of God? Yes. The savior? Yes. Perform miracles? Yes. Communal bread and meal? Yes. Crucified? Yes. Resurrected? Yes. Ascended and descended? Yes. Divine judge? Yes. When you're talking about the comparison mythologies, you can't make one between Horus and Christ. It does not exist, right? Can you make one with Adonis? No. Was he born of a virgin? No, he was born from a tree. Son of God? No. Savior? No. Perform miracles? No. Communal meal? No. No. Death by boar? Was he crucified? No. He died by a boar in a field of lettuce. A wild pig. Was he resurrected? No. Later Christian interpretation. Ascended? Descended? Yes. Before death. Was he a divine judge? No. You can't make these comparisons. The deity Sybil, right? Virgin birth. Yes, some accounts have mother conceiving by a fruit produced by blood. She was born from a piece of fruit. You can't make these comparisons with the dying and rising Savior story of Christ. By all, we already went over that. Dionysus, we already went over that. We already went over that. Hermes, no, not a virgin birth. So when we start going through these origins of the Christ myth, we see these things are debunked. A lot of this stuff was made up. It's very recent, new. Nobody compared Christ to any of these mystery systems before the 1800s. You just didn't see it. Never existed. All this comes from the minds of men and women at later dates. So I'm going to end it there. Garfield.
Hey, brother Yarah.
Yes.
I got somebody on the panel. The person wants to ask you a question. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah.
Well, me, oh yeah, I'm just showing love. I don't really got a particular question or anything like that. But are y'all still on the Israelite stuff?
No, we're talking about did Jesus exist? Don't worry about it, brother. You could come back on. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Come back on. All right. Continue, my brother. You're about to close out, so go ahead. If anybody wants to jump on and challenge Yarah's information or have a pushback, you could jump on and get it in. Anybody got a pushback? They want to challenge Yarah? Come on the panel. We've been on for almost 3 hours. But of course, y'all got to show his Cash App some love for taking out the time to put this together and everything. All right? And he has a lot more, especially with that Egypt craziness. Anybody? Nobody? All right, cool. We good. All right, Yarah, close out, bro.
Yeah, so I want to say, man, again, shout out to you, Garfield, man. It was I appreciate you, man, for allowing me to have this time, man, and appreciate you for bringing me on. Again, like I said, I'm always available. You know, I'll take questions whether people agree or disagree with the information that I present. I always try to bring sources, whether you agree with them or not. At least I have something you can vet. And so, you know, again, this whole thing of Jesus being born on December 25th, we know the Bible doesn't actually teach it that way. We know that all of this stuff came later. These were actually mystery systems trying to compete with Christianity at later dates. All of the zeitgeist stuff you hear from D.M. Murdoch that you don't see until later modern times. So a lot of this stuff that you see, you know, there's no way you can say that Christ stole, or the biblical narrative was stolen from these things. Even if people say, you know, that, well, they have a piece of here, or that, or some of it looks like it here. It may not be all, but it looks like some of it there. Well, then you're not talking about borrowing. You're not talking about borrowing or copying, right? A copy is a copy, right? And so when they talk about that, like, a lot of that is conjecture. There's no evidence for it. There's just no evidence for it. So I want to say, man, again, man, peace, man. All praises to the Most High, man. I hope somebody learned something. Somebody was edified about it. If you want to push back at me, subscribe to my channel at Elder Yarah. You'll see it at Elder Yarah. You'll see just like it's spelled at the bottom of the screen. Come on, man. I take questions. You know, if people have biblical questions, I take questions. Send me an email. Come on about my channel. Send me an email. I'll answer your questions. I'll do a live stream. I'll go in and try to bring out the information that I have. So
yeah, I'm gonna set up you and Brother Sanchez for a Friday night or a Sunday evening here, and I'm what do you call it? I'm trying to do something with Moore and probably D-Red, something about the Native Americans being Israelites.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I'm gonna set that up soon. All right. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, we out of here, man. Peace and love to y'all. Elder Yarah, hit you up back later on.
Definitely.
We got a lot to talk about off the air.
Definitely.
And shout out to Morpheus. Sonetta did a show earlier about him, but we're going to do a celebration of life tomorrow for his daughter. Oh, and I'm gonna put the Cash App out. You know, brothers talking about sending flowers. I'm not sending no flowers. We gonna send money, because when it's time to die, you need money. That's what you need.
Absolutely.
All right, peace and love, family. I'm out of here. Peace. Thank you, Yarah.